Chapter 161, Master of Bone Shattering, Ginny Weasley. How's this for a Christmas present? I think you'll like it. Cyrus couldn't help but smile at Lord Voldemort's expression. Voldemort wanted to deal with him. How could Cyrus not be ready? Voldemort clearly felt threatened by the two people standing before him, but he kept a composed face and forced a grin. What a surprise! You tricked Dumbledore into coming here, so now we can team up and kill him together. He sneered, an obvious attempt to sow discord. Because of Cyrus's precarious position, the claim planted doubt. McGonagall and the others glanced at Cyrus with suspicion, their wands tilting subtly in his direction. Cyrus noticed, but he didn't care. Even if they attacked together, he could handle them easily. When he'd escaped from Hogwarts, his power had been only comparable to Snape's. Now, in his estimation, these deans weren't worth worrying about. Professor Dumbledore, Miss Riddle and Lord Voldemort are not working together. Harry, wrapped in blue flames, shouted. The fire had completely burned through the ropes binding him. He was desperate that Voldemort's words not poison the relationship between Cyrus and Dumbledore. Shut up, Harry. You don't get to speak here, Voldemort snapped. Then, furious, he cast a spell straight at Harry. A jet of black magic shot forth, sprinting toward him. Harry, Sirius howled. Voldemort's attack was sudden. After keeping Harry alive for so long, he had now struck at this moment. Just as the curse was about to hit, a towering cocoon of blue flames flared up and enveloped Harry. The spell detonated against the shield with a thunderous blast, tearing out a chunk of the fire. Cyrus noticed that where Voldemort's curse had struck, the flames didn't knit back together. The area seemed to have been made untouchable by the fire. Voldemort had developed a counter to the fire shield. It wasn't surprising. Most spells in this world, aside from the unforgivable curses, have counters. Even if you don't know the exact counterspell, a general dispelling charm can often be used. The fire shield Grindelwald used in Paris, for example, had been broken by the stunning spell. After shattering the shield in front of Harry, Voldemort didn't press the attack. His strike seemed meant more as intimidation than execution. Don't worry, Harry. I trust Cyrus, Dumbledore said calmly to Voldemort. You trust him? That's new. Voldemort's face flickered with a rare look of indignation. Dumbledore's simple reassurance did more damage than Voldemort expected. From the first time Dumbledore had met Tom Riddle, suspicion had lurked in him. At first, Dumbledore had thought the young Tom far too perfect. That perfection made him uneasy. A child filled with hatred and arrogance, who then transformed into a humble, polite pupil at Hogwarts. Such a sudden change begged explanation. Those doubts had taken root and never left Dumbledore's mind. I tried, Tom, Dumbledore said, and Voldemort let out a scornful sneer before turning his attention to Cyrus. What good would teaming up with Dumbledore do you? You can't kill me, and he won't hand you anything. He waved his slender wand, the tip sliding in an inviting gesture. Come, Cyrus, don't be foolish. Stand with me. You are like me. We can kill Dumbledore together. Then no one could stop us. You're wrong, Tom. Dumbledore stepped forward. In that moment, he trusted Cyrus without reservation and strode into the blue flames without hesitation. He was tall, and each step pressed down with overwhelming force. Even the fire bowed beneath him. Cyrus is not like you. He chose a different path. That was the point. It wasn't who you were born to be, but who you chose to become. That's enough talk, Dumbledore. Take Harry first. Cyrus was tired of the back and forth. Verbal fighting here would only waste time. Harry's condition looked fragile. Take Harry away, Pettigrew, Voldemort said quietly to Peter. Pettigrew froze, glanced at the angry deans behind Cyrus and then at Sirius, who looked ready to tear him apart, and immediately wilted. Me? He squeaked. What, do you have an objection? Or do you want to stay and face Dumbledore and Cyrus? Voldemort said. Pettigrew shrank back and stammered. I'll take Harry away, Master. He bound Harry with a spell, grabbed him by the collar, and bolted. McGonagall and the others gave chase without hesitation. Cyrus, Dumbledore, and Voldemort remained where they were, each poised for the right moment to strike. Voldemort felt the pressure, 2 against 1, and his grip on Lanlok's goblin body might not survive if Cyrus and Dumbledore didn't slip up. Still, he knew where the ancient magic inside that body had come from. Losing the body would be inconvenient, but the crucial prize was still Harry. If Pettigrew couldn't keep Harry, Voldemort's path to resurrection would hit even more obstacles. They stood in tense silence while, in the snow-covered forest beyond, the sounds of a new skirmish rose. Dumbledore acted first. He raised his hand and unleashed a golden spell, a dazzling shaft of light like a miniature sun. The immense magic bent the blue flames and slammed toward Voldemort like a cannonball. Voldemort waved back. Black mist born of pain surged and swallowed the golden sun, turning into several enormous black serpents that lunged at Cyrus and Dumbledore. Cyrus's wand spun, and the fire dragon he'd once used to level the castle spread its claws, pinning the black serpents to the ground. The impact cracked the earth beneath them. Bricks turned to dust. "Sectum sempra," Cyrus cried. Invisible blades sliced cleanly through the remaining great snakes, the cuts smooth as polished glass. The blades flew on, but Voldemort blocked them all. Meanwhile, Pettigrew raced through the dense wood. Harry slumped and bound across his broom. McGonagall and the others pursued on foot. None had brooms. Pettigrew's old broom was still much faster. Sirius, in his animagus form, tore after them as a large black dog, bounding swiftly through the snow. He couldn't match the broom's speed, but had the agility to weave between trees. McGonagall, older and less able to manhandle the chase, raised her wand. The white snow beneath their feet rose up and reshaped itself into several crystalline white horses. She mounted, and they all continued the pursuit. Spells flew back and forth in the narrow gaps between trees. Pettigrew was hysterical. He fired killing curses behind him in a string of green light, several of them skimming past Sirius and burying themselves in the snow. One narrowly missed Flitwick. The stray curse struck his horse, which collapsed into a scatter of unregatherable snowflakes. Flitwick rolled awkwardly and was buried until he scrambled out, coughing. Pettigrew's confidence grew. That old broom made all the difference. "Avada Kedavra!" he shouted again, and the green beam blew up the snow at Sirius's feet. Sirius lost his footing and went sprawling. Pettigrew laughed. He pulled up sharply, wheeled his broom to face Sirius, and shouted, "You want to fight me?" Sirius shifted back into human form and drew for a duel, but an Expelliarmus shot out and spun his wand from his hand, sending it skittering into the snow. "Ha! You're dead, Sirius," Pettigrew crowed. He'd waited a long time for this. Sirius's wand was gone. Pettigrew gloated. "You're in my hands now!" "You despicable traitor," Sirius ground out through his teeth. No wand didn't mean surrender. He'd have bitten Pettigrew if he could. "Beast! Filthy, stinking rat!" Sirius snarled. "Shut up!" Pettigrew snapped and cast Cruciatus. Sirius writhed, pinwheeling in pain. "You know what? He would have killed me. I had no choice." Pettigrew pleaded wildly. "You deserve to die. I'd rather die than betray my friends." He fired more spells. Sirius's face drained of color as he clung to consciousness. Harry, seeing his godfather in agony, thrashed wildly and butted Pettigrew with his head. Pettigrew responded by elbowing him hard on the scar. Harry slumped unconscious. Pettigrew's face turned cruel as he watched Sirius near collapse. "Don't pretend, Sirius. I know you always look down on me. You suggested switching Secret Keepers back then, and you were the one who killed James. If you miss him so much, I'll send you to him now." His eyes shone red. His wand flared green. "Confringo." A clear voice cut through the forest, and a brilliant red blast exploded. Boom! The shockwave whipping the snow into a blinding spray. Pettigrew, caught in the light, was gone. Out of the dust and spray rode a red-haired girl on a broom, her wand still out. She was strikingly beautiful, her face cold as iron. Sirius never would have guessed a young girl could throw such a powerful, blasting curse. If every lower and mid-level Death Eater had that kind of strength, their losses back then would have been far higher. Beside her, a tall, freckled, red-haired boy gaped, Ron Weasley. Sirius recognized him immediately. "Did you two go mad? What if you hit Harry?" Ron exclaimed. "I aimed," Ginny said, annoyed, then dove her Comet 290 down to scoop Harry up from the snow. Ron followed quickly on his Nimbus 2000. "Sorry, Sirius. We unwrapped your surprise for Harry early," Ron said sheepishly, even as Ginny held Harry tight. "It's fine. Thanks to you two, Harry and I would have been in trouble otherwise." Sirius managed, struggling to his feet, and took Harry from Ginny's arms. "How did you two get here?" "I managed to contact Cyrus," Ron replied, glancing up at the owl circling overhead. He had found the way here using the bird Cyrus had given him. But I was worried, and then Ginny had an idea. Ginny ignored the small exchange and fixed Sirius Black with a cold look. Where is Cyrus? Thanks to Kopkin for the 100 points reward. 162. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. Where is Cyrus? Ginny asked coldly. Her tone made Sirius falter. She didn't look like she'd come to help. She looked like she meant to tear Cyrus open to get at him and Harry while she was at it. Ron pursed his lips but said nothing. He'd be furious too if Harry suddenly became inseparable from Neville and kept secrets from the rest of them. He's fighting you-know-who, Sirius replied. Ginny's anger dissolved at once into worry. Her cheeks, normally rosy, went pale. You-know-who? He won't be in danger, will he? She asked. Ron shivered at the name. Danger? Sirius rolled his eyes, remembering Cyrus and Dumbledore surrounding Voldemort, a dragon of blue flame flattening parts of the castle with a single blow, and Voldemort's haggard, furious face. What danger could he be in? Dumbledore's there too. I've never seen you-know-who look so pathetic. Ginny and Ron both breathed a little easier. At that moment, McGonagall and the others who had fallen behind arrived. They looked first at Sirius carrying the unconscious Harry, then at Ginny and Ron, and their expressions changed repeatedly. Is Harry all right? McGonagall asked, voice shaking. She had heard too much bad news during the war. He's fine. He fainted, Sirius said. Thank goodness, McGonagall said, visibly relaxing. What about Pettigrew? Did he escape? Pettigrew? Sirius looked around at the snow, confused, which made McGonagall and Flitwick glance in that direction. He's everywhere now. McGonagall's eyes widened. Sirius then told them what had happened. Her stern face pounded with anxiety as she turned on Ron and Ginny. You two were reckless. What if something unexpected had happened? She scolded. Gryffindor, 20 points. Ron dropped like a deflating balloon. He wanted to protest, but McGonagall's glare stopped him. 20 points gone. How long would Hermione mourn that loss when she returned? McGonagall drew a long breath, but then her expression softened. However, for your bravery in saving Harry and Sirius, each of you has earned 50 points. Really? Ron's eyes lit up. And for your loyalty, I'll add 20 more, Pomona Sprout murmured as she bent to help with Harry. I've 10 points here for the blasting curse, Flitwick added with a smile toward Ginny. He had noticed her talent the previous year and had even invited her to audit his club, an invitation she'd never taken. The spell was well used, but don't use it next time, he warned. The blasting curse was a dark spell, and the sudden 100-plus points had Ron grinning like a fool. Ginny didn't care for points. Her face was tight with worry. Professor, we have to go help Mr. Cyrus, she insisted. McGonagall remembered the other battlefield. She didn't trust Cyrus as blindly as Sirius did. If Cyrus and Voldemort had joined forces, Dumbledore could be in real trouble. She considered blocking the children, but she couldn't ignore the situation either. We must return immediately. Perhaps Dumbledore needs our help. Children, you must go back to the school at once. No, I'm not going back, Ginny snapped. No one at that age liked being treated like a child. I can fight too. I took down Pettigrew. I'm not going back either, Ron said, teeth chattering but resolute. We have to help Cyrus. If it weren't for him, Harry would be in danger. McGonagall exhaled helplessly. Who were they to send against Voldemort? With Ginny's limited power, she'd only hinder the battle. Still, she couldn't tie them down here. Sirius picked up his wand from the snow and glanced in the direction they had come from. It's quiet over there. McGonagall noticed then that the non-stop, bomb-like explosions near the castle had stopped. Had the fighting ended? She was worried. All right, let's go check. Sirius, you'll take them back to the school, she ordered. No room for refusal. Sirius had intended to do the same. He had to take Harry somewhere safe. He conjured a rope and bound Harry, Ginny, and Ron together. How could you do this to me? I saved you, Ginny complained. I'm saving you now, too. You haven't seen you-know-whose power, child, Sirius said softly. Zombie walk. At his spell, the three children stiffened, as if made of wood. Sirius flicked his wand again, and they rose like planks. He mounted his broom and left with McGonagall and the others. They returned toward Luke Wood's castle with Flitwick and Pomona Sprout, only to find Cyrus and Dumbledore gone. Where are they? Flitwick asked, cautious of the lingering heat, searching for any sign of the three figures. Pomona was the first to notice a solitary doorway set against the flames, its color a ghostly blue that had blended into the fire. "What's that?" she whispered. "Revelio," McGonagall said, and 3 confused sets of footprints appeared, intricate and tangled, leading straight into the door. "It seems they all went in there." "Then we go too," Flitwick said, suddenly full of the old fighting spirit. He'd been a skilled duelist in his youth. The 3 followed the prince and stepped through the doorway. It felt like a teleport. Beyond it lay an unusual, ancient space, a vast, magnificent palace that made even Hogwarts seem small. Gilded pillars, carved in exquisite detail, stood shattered by spells. Many lay broken on the floor. Stone warriors, stripped of enchantment, lay inert. McGonagall's eyes brightened at the sight. If only she could learn to make such guardians for Hogwarts. She had long wanted wards like these. Deeper in the cavern, the battle between Cyrus and Voldemort continued. Voldemort had summoned a giant pensieve guardian and flung it at them. "Confringo," he cried. Cyrus flicked his wrist and shattered the guardian. Fine, annihilating sand rushed forward like a gray wind, forming a veil. Voldemort sliced the veil with spells. Sharp blades slashed toward Cyrus. Dumbledore whipped out a tongue of fire, fiend fire, crimson devilish flames that spread through the cave. 3 separate fires tangled together, a converging sea of flame. Cyrus walked through it. The fire under his feet parted as if reluctant to burn him. Even Voldemort's fiend fire yielded. Cyrus struck with spells whose impact shook the vault. Working alongside Dumbledore, their coordination forced Voldemort back again and again. His stolen goblin armor lay battered. Cyrus's magic, laced with ancient magic, hit with incredible force. Dumbledore, with the Elder Wand, was a force in his own right. "Surrender, Tom. Today you will fail," Dumbledore said, pressing the attack so hard Voldemort could barely look up. Cyrus felt almost superfluous standing there. He intended to withdraw and finish his own trial. He only needed to retrieve Luke Wood's memories. Many would hesitate to view a pensieve under such circumstances, but Cyrus needed the memories only to place them directly in his mind. He slipped away from the fighting and left Dumbledore to it. Dumbledore noticed his departure, but said nothing. Perhaps he wanted Voldemort to abandon the goblin body, so he'd be forced to search desperately for another. At the center of the cavern stood a giant sculpture reaching to the dome. When Cyrus approached, the sculpture's left eye glowed and shed a single silver tear. The tear condensed into a ball of light, one of the stored memories. Cyrus caught it. It was not only a memory, but a token. He tapped it and watched it open. It was Morgana's memory. She had invited 4 guardians to her home and shown them the miracle. She had stripped pain from her father's heart. The guardians were astonished. They were glad at Morgana's talent, but uneasy. Was removing pain from a person truly a kindness? That magic carried its own dangers. Cyrus watched silently. He understood why the guardians had left the memory behind as a warning, to deter the cautious and decent. But he was not deterred. He would not give up this power. Even without magic, ordinary people with guns and knives could change a soul's course. He believed his own soul was strong enough to bear and control this power. With many of Voldemort's remaining soul fragments effectively in his hands, he felt he could wield that force without corrupting himself. The memory ended. Cyrus opened his eyes. Dumbledore's fight with Voldemort had reached a turning point. The old man, weary but resolute, had shattered half of Voldemort's body. Voldemort abandoned the broken goblin form and retreated into a humble black mist. In that state, Dumbledore could not do more. He did not seem disappointed. If anything, he had expected it. "How pathetic, Tom," Cyrus scoffed. "What's left of your life but failure?" "Failure? I have never failed," Voldemort hissed. "But you? Do you think you're better than me? Do you think Dumbledore really trusts you? He only borrowed your power this time. Once I'm dealt with, what will he do to you?" Cyrus said nothing, only smiled coldly. He didn't much care how Dumbledore felt about him. If the trial succeeded and he gained the ancient magic, he wouldn't need Dumbledore's trust. For now, it was enough that Dumbledore did not prevent him. Later, as the others arrived through the portal, Dumbledore greeted them. He left Cyrus with a remark that made Cyrus blink. "Snape told me you've been to Godric's Hollow?" Dumbledore said, lifting a finger in that odd, teasing way of his. Then, as if concluding something that had been on his mind, he added quietly, The last enemy to be destroyed is death. 163. Ancient magic, imprinted in the bodies of magical animals. The last enemy to be destroyed is death? Mr. Cyrus paused. If Dumbledore wasn't speaking in riddles, that phrase was most likely the password to the headmaster's office. Apparently, the old headmaster still smarted from Mr. Cyrus guessing, for the greater good last time, something shameful and uncomfortable to remember. Very few people knew about Dumbledore's past. At Hogwarts, only Professor McGonagall knew those details. The headmaster and the cat-loving professor had been old friends for years. During the next Quidditch match, Mr. Cyrus looked up. After fighting Lord Voldemort for so long, dusk had already fallen, and snow was beginning to drift down from the gray sky. The Christmas holiday split the two terms at Hogwarts. The next Quidditch match wouldn't be until March. But Mr. Cyrus wasn't in any hurry to get to a trial. The memories left by the Guardians were worth savoring. Percival's memories revealed the immense, ancient power of ancient magic, spells that could persist long after the caster's death. Luke Wood's memories even recorded Morgana's method of stripping away a person's emotions. These were lessons Mr. Cyrus wanted to study. And the mysteries of ancient magic didn't stop there. Many magical creatures carried their own unique ancient powers. A phoenix's tears could heal any wound, and its flames could render movement untraceable. Dragons had natural magic resistance that could shrug off many spells. An Akami could change size at will. A demiguise could make itself invisible. Mr. Cyrus hungered for those abilities. In that sense, he was as greedy as Lord Voldemort, like a snake trying to swallow prey much larger than itself. Looks like I can smuggle some magical creatures, he thought. Another problem had been nagging him, too. Ever since Ginny learned the diary could communicate with him, she had been relentless, trying constantly to reach out. Mr. Cyrus knew he couldn't avoid her forever, so he stopped leaving her messages unread. Good evening, Ginny. Her reply was thick with hurt. She had only just discovered the secret that day, then was taken away without seeing Mr. Cyrus. She knew he had been facing you-know-who, and that the battle had been grave. Sirius and the other professors had taken her away for protection. Even so, she felt abandoned. You ignored me for months, she texted. Harry knew, Ron knew, Hermione knew. Even Hermione borrowed the diary before going to you. She contacted you then, didn't she? Ginny had always felt slighted. At home, the twins were inseparable, and Ron often treated her like the youngest and least important. Mr. Cyrus knew children needed companions. Ginny had considered him her best friend since first year, and had never been reserved with him. Mr. Cyrus apologized. I'm sorry, Ginny, but you know my situation. I'm still wanted by the ministry. I don't have much time to be in touch. It was the same with Hermione. If it hadn't been for Sirius's matter, I might not have responded to her either. His explanation had some effect. Ginny was not unreasonable, and she knew how her parents viewed Mr. Cyrus. Mr. Weasley grumbled at dinner about Mr. Cyrus's recent antics and how he'd become a headache for the ministry. After Mr. Cyrus attacked Gringotts, Mr. Weasley might not have linked him directly to Voldemort, but he considered Mr. Cyrus dangerous. Blowing up a bank tended to create that impression. They chatted for a long time. Ginny prattled on about everything in her life. Mr. Cyrus fell comfortably back into the role of listener. Late into the night, he noticed her messages had stopped. She had fallen asleep. He collected his thoughts and slipped back into the darkness. The Christmas holiday passed quickly. Harry recovered the next day. The ordeal had not made him more fearful of Voldemort. If anything, it had made the Dark Lord seem less terrifying. After watching Mr. Cyrus and Dumbledore work together, Voldemort no longer looked invincible. Harry spent his days flying over the Black Lake on the crossbow Sirius had given him, free and light, and had lent his Nimbus 2000 to Ron. The cold, knife-sharp wind couldn't pry the smiles off their faces. Students ice skating on the frozen lake watched them with envy. Harry's favorite gift, though, was not the crossbow. It was a small photo album from Mr. Cyrus. He kept it by his bed and slept easier for the first time in years, feeling as if his parents were watching over him. This was the last day of the holiday. In the evening, Hermione, bundled in a red scarf, tumbled out of a carriage and rushed over to Harry and Ron, breathless with worry. They had, of course, exchanged letters during the break. I'm glad you're okay, Harry, she said, shivering slightly. Do you know why you-know-who kidnapped you? Hermione had been thinking hard. She didn't believe Voldemort had taken Harry on a whim. He must have some purpose. What purpose? He hates you because you beat him, Ron said. Doesn't he want to kill you? If he only wanted to kill you, Pettigrew could have strangled you when he came into the dormitory, Hermione said, warming her hands in the air. You said you-know-who can't touch you. You're dangerous to him, but he still kidnapped you. That means he must want something through you. Do you remember anything he said? Hermione was astute. No one else had thought to ask this. Only Mr. Cyrus and Dumbledore knew the full situation. Harry tried to recall, but shook his head. He said when he was resurrected, he'd kill me in front of all the Death Eaters to show them the boy who lived was a fraud. Well, that explains it. He wants to reestablish his authority, Ron said. Losing to a baby made his followers doubt him. That was true and part of Voldemort's plan, but Hermione still felt something was missing. Without the knowledge of Horcruxes, she couldn't imagine Voldemort's true goal, using Harry's blood to anchor himself back to life. She set that aside. Anyway, what did you get for Christmas? She asked, naturally curious about Mr. Cyrus's gifts. I got a book full of spells, not in any textbook. Hermione practically buzzed with delight. Only you would be happy to get a book, Ron laughed. Then he boasted, he gave me an owl. He was pleased he had no proper pet, and Mr. Cyrus had remembered that Scabbers was gone. It felt good to be noticed in his family. I got a photo album with pictures of my mum and dad inside, Harry said, smiling, then frowning. But some photos are torn out. Ginny got some alchemy tools, Ron added. She says they're interesting. She's been chatting with Mr. Cyrus every day these past few days, but he hasn't replied much after the first day. I'm going to see, Hermione said at once, bolting away like a rabbit. The two boys exchanged blank looks. Mr. Cyrus was back at Malfoy Manor. Lucius had just seen off a minor ancestor and now greeted a far more significant visitor. The manor buzzed with guests. Whether they were purebloods or not, as long as they had money, everyone wanted to know about the Wizard Bank. These people included influential figures in the wizarding world and even some ministry officials. The Malfoys had long been well connected. In the past, Lucius had cultivated those ties by buying influence. After Harry's rescue, though, everything had changed. Harry had publicly vouched for the Wizard Bank, saying he would deposit the Potter family fortune there and questioning Gringotts' security. That endorsement, coming from the boy who lived, had put the Wizard Bank in a favorable light. When Lucius opened his door to find Mr. Cyrus, he was so startled he nearly fell. Master! Cyrus had almost forgotten he had come simply to ask Lucius to procure certain magical creatures. Lucius, how's the bank coming along? Everything's going smoothly, Master, Lucius answered, voice tight. More and more wizards are depositing with us, but I'm worried the goblins won't give up. I've heard they've made trouble at the ministry. What if they strike back? Those creatures value money above all else, Mr. Cyrus said with a sneer. Making them give up profit is like skinning them alive. He understood Lucius's fear. Don't worry, the goblins won't be able to stir up trouble. They had already been weakened. Many had died at Gringotts, and when Voldemort had taken control of Lanlok's body, he had also taken a number of goblin fighters. There weren't many of those ugly creatures left in Britain. What could the remaining Gringotts goblins do besides howl outside the ministry? Still, centuries of accumulated wealth might allow them to hire many mercenaries, and Mr. Cyrus decided to leave a contingency. Where is the vault now? In another secret family territory. I used a spell to expand a temporary space, Lucius said quickly. Master, if we push, we could take over Gringotts directly. Do it, Mr. Cyrus said. People like Lucius were useful at managing wealth and influence. He would leave the brutal fighting to others. A little money spent to grease palms would return tenfold. I'll leave you some guards, enough to resist a small army. He cast ancient magic and conjured several stone sentinels. These were far stronger than ordinary transfiguration constructs and could even self-repair. A dozen of them together could hunt dragons. Put some in the vault and some around the manor. Rizumu, your family's life is valuable. Lucius, who had served Voldemort for years, had never heard such words. For a moment he was almost moved. Master, now I want you to help me acquire a batch of magical creatures. As many different kinds as possible, Mr. Cyrus instructed. Thanks to Mouse Swan for the 156 reward points, and thank you all for your concern, but I haven't considered writing full-time. As many have said, relying on full attendance is unstable, and the mindset differs. The next book might not even succeed. I'm resigning because my current job is too mentally exhausting, with 3 hours of commuting each day, so I plan to switch to another position and take a short break after resigning. Chapter 164. Newt. I'm not Dumbledore's favorite student. Although Cyrus had entrusted Lucius with collecting fantastic beasts, it wasn't easy for Lucius to procure a decent batch. It wasn't that he was incompetent. The British wizarding world tightly protected its magical creatures. Very few beasts ever reached the market, and most that did were either non-lethal or lacked extraordinary powers. Anything classified XXX or above was already scarce. XXXX class beasts were practically never found outside breeding programs or protected reserves. Even if Lucius had access to smugglers, waiting for a shipment could take forever. Truly powerful beasts rarely appeared on the black market at all. After weighing his options, Cyrus decided outright robbery would be faster. He welcomed any kind. His interest was research, not battlefield strength. A dragon would be useful, certainly, but he also wanted to study a demiguise, poor in combat, but useful, invisibility cloaks and foresight among its traits. Cyrus planned a two-pronged approach. Lucius would handle procurement where possible, and Cyrus would personally rob smugglers. Smugglers tended to sell the best items, after all. Cyrus didn't linger long at Malfoy Manor. He didn't want to make Lucius uncomfortable. He detoured to the Hog's Head, the bar where information flowed. Unfortunately, he turned up nothing useful. Fantastic beast smuggling happened daily, but traders rarely advertised. Usually, the buyer was already chosen before a run. The dragon egg Hagrid had found, for example, had been a trap set by Quirrell. The Forbidden Forest, Cyrus mused, held many beasts, but it was Hogwarts' backyard, limited in variety and populated by troublesome centaurs he preferred to avoid. The most complete collection, naturally, would be in Newt Scamander's suitcase, but he didn't know Newt's whereabouts. With the Hog's Head a dead end, Cyrus thought of the Ministry. The British Ministry of Magic had a whole department for the regulation and control of magical creatures. Its files might point to smugglers. Cyrus was a man of action. When he left the Hog's Head, he was already in the alley outside the Ministry. It was late. Employees were leaving. Cyrus watched one wizard depart, adopted his appearance, and slipped in. He'd used Dolores's identity before, but not for a long time. He had returned that disguise to its original owner after altering a few memories. He strode toward the public restroom entrance. The Ministry's infamous choice for an entryway still baffled him. Weren't the founders worried the magic might one day fail and staff be flushed into the sewers, or something terrible fall from the Ministry's ceiling? He chose not to force his way in. The front desk clerks were still there and looked surprised to see the wizard he'd become walk back up to them. "A dork, why are you back?" one asked. "Forgot something," Cyrus said lightly. He greeted them casually, then, as he closed the distance, he twirled a slender finger in front of the clerk's eyes. "Confundo." The man's gaze went blank for a heartbeat, then cleared. He shook his head and said, "All right, your wand's fine. Go on in." Cyrus walked through the near-empty hall to the lift. The hall sat 8 levels below ground. He would be heading up to reach the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Though the department was reputed to be quiet, in fact, it was the Ministry's second largest. Cases involving fantastic beasts happened all the time, like the recent goblin unrest, which had caused the Ministry no end of trouble. Those goblins protested and made scenes, and some wizards, foolishly, in Cyrus's view, sided with them, calling Lucius's plans cruel. Cyrus had only gone to Gringotts to retrieve what was rightfully wizards, and when the fight broke out, he'd killed one man, Boderick. The goblins had brought disaster on themselves. Cyrus felt a hot anger at what he saw as wizards' weakness. Repeated concessions only emboldened the goblins. Sooner or later, they would be an actual threat. If he hadn't acted when he did, in a few years rebellion could return, at a terrible cost in blood. These pests, he thought, sooner or later I'll wipe them out. Goblins were useful only for their forging craft, which could be learned. Once he had their techniques, they would be expendable. Goblins wanted wands, wizards wanted goblin-forged metal. That was a fair exchange. In the ministry's main hall, beneath the central statue, was an inscription Cyrus found it hard to disagree with. Magic is might. A cruel, immutable law of power, one Voldemort had embraced, one Cyrus understood all too well. Power made the rules. Mercy was a luxury of the strong, not a right of the weak. He exited the lift, bypassed the Goblin and Centaur liaison office, and walked further in. Fantastic creatures covered a wide range. Beasts and certain subhumans, lycanthropes, goblins, house elves. There was even a department devoted to dragons, but none of that held interest for him now. The department corridors were nearly empty. As he moved inward, he saw a balding, middle-aged man locking his door with a wand. At the sound of footsteps, the man looked up and brightened. "A dork, you haven't left yet?" he said. "Still something to do," Cyrus replied, immediately stepping into his cover. "By the way, have there been any fantastic beast smuggling cases recently?" "One's still under investigation." The man blinked. "Why the sudden interest? Aren't you from magical transportation?" Cyrus shrugged. "Dark wizards sometimes transport beasts here, and if they slip up, it causes a stir. There was a ghost ship rumor in the North Sea not long ago." "That's true," the man said, remembering. "Once they smuggled merpeople, my word. When that merperson sang in the North Sea, muggles jumped overboard." He shuddered. Merpeople songs weren't as lovely as in tales. Sound produced underwater could be a weapon. "The files are in there. Look if you like," the man said, tossing his office keys to Cyrus. "Mr. Scamander is actually monitoring a group of smugglers right now." He smiled and hurried off. "Come by sometime. Meet my son, Cedric. He's a good lad." Cyrus blinked at the name. Amos Diggory was a powerful head of department, and he had indeed mentioned his son, Cedric. To Cyrus, Cedric's story was one bookmarked in the past, a bright life cut short. In the canon, it had been a line between innocence and brutality. But realities had shifted. Whatever else might happen, renewed darkness wouldn't mean unending sacrifice. Inside the office, Cyrus opened the files. One name kept recurring: Newt Scamander. Newt Scamander was an old wizard, 96. Retirement hadn't slowed him much. He and his wife Tina lived in Dorset most of the time, but Newt remained restless. He still took on the occasional smuggling case, especially now that his grandson was school age and Newt had more freedom. That day, Newt and Tina were surveilling a group of dark-robed wizards. "Are you sure it's them?" Tina asked, her salamander-like eyes sharp as ever, fixed on the men in cloaks. "Yes." Newt's shyness hadn't left him. His voice was that of an awkward, well-meaning boy. "You don't have to come," he began, but Tina cut him off. "I'm bored at home," she said, barely concealing her excitement. "It always reminds me of the old days." She cast her mind back to the duel with Grindelwald half a century ago that had shaped their lives. If she had gone to Hogwarts, she would have been a Gryffindor, she thought without thinking. The old woman was eager to move. "Should we act now?" she whispered. "No." Newt steadied her. "Don't alert them. We don't know where they're keeping the beasts. We wait until they reveal themselves." He slipped a hand into his pocket and cupped a small, furry creature, the Niffler. Newt sent it out like a tiny scout. This Niffler was lighter in color than the ones Cyrus had seen in tales, but its instincts were the same. Cyrus had noticed Newt and Tina from some distance. They were hard to miss, especially Newt's ever-present large brown case, which hummed with magical echoes. He tapped his wand with a quiet charm and walked over. "Mr. Scamander," he called. Newt and Tina started. They turned to see a young man with slicked-back hair and slightly gold-tinged tips approaching with an easy confidence. "Who are you?" Newt asked, narrowing his eyes. For a moment, his face clouded, as if familiarity had flickered into view and then vanished, and he shivered like someone walking through blue flames. He blurted out in that peculiar, embarrassed way of his, "Wait, I'm not Dumbledore's favorite student anymore." 165. Barty Crouch Jr. "I'm not Dumbledore's favorite student." Newt, as if seized by a flashback, trembled at the sight of Cyrus. He felt himself transported back to a night in Paris. The white-haired man held his wand in a hand with distinct knuckles, his eyes full of scorn, and dark blue flames seemed to lick the air around him. For a moment, even Cyrus looked taken aback. Then he blinked and said, "Of course I know. Dumbledore's favorite student now is Harry Potter. Do Grindelwald and I really look that much alike?" Newt's head swam. The shadow of Grindelwald flickered before him and then resolved into Cyrus. They did not, in fact, look the same. Both were handsome, but Grindelwald had a more volatile air, and more importantly, Grindelwald hated Newt. Still, the man before him seemed both familiar and dangerous. Newt's eyes flicked nervously toward the dark wizards he'd been staking out. "Don't worry, they can't see in here right now," Cyrus whispered. Before coming over, he'd cast a peacekeeping charm, a subtle ward that made them invisible to those outside it. It worked much like the way ordinary folk couldn't see the leaky cauldron. The charm hid their presence from other wizards. "Excuse me, who are you?" Tina asked, frowning and tightening her grip on her wand, ready to defend at the slightest provocation. "Tom Riddle? The criminal wanted by the Ministry of Magic," she blurted. Tina's mind leapt to the worst. Tom Riddle, whose crimes were too numerous to list in her view, was the mastermind behind the Chamber of Secrets attacks, had escaped Azkaban, shelled parts of the Scottish coast, robbed Gringotts. Hearing that name, Newt reflexively reached for his suitcase. "You're too tense, Mr. Scamander." Cyrus laid a hand over the suitcase and it slipped from Newt's fingers, sliding away at the wave of Cyrus's hand. "I mean no harm," he added earnestly. "Yes, I can see that." Newt stared at the suitcase Cyrus had pushed away. The casual wandless magic chilled him. He had fought hard to forget certain memories. Without his suitcase, he felt exposed. Even with Tina beside him, he knew they might not be a match for this seemingly young wizard. "So, Mr. Riddle, what can I do for you?" Newt asked, a practiced calm in his voice. He'd weathered many storms. Even if the name meant something else, he would not be cowed. "For your creatures," Cyrus said bluntly. He was never one for deception. Lies were a sign of weakness, and Cyrus did not need to hide behind them. Newt's face hardly changed, but his eyes tightened with distance and disgust. He treated his magical creatures as family. Far too many wizards treated them as tools or ingredients. Yes, some parts of creatures were used in potions, and even wizards themselves sometimes provided blood or hair, but dark wizards often took until the animals were bled dry. Newt assumed Cyrus would be like that. In truth, Cyrus kept his dragons well and rarely subjected them to experiments. At most, he'd take a palm-sized scrap of dragon hide, which would heal in an hour. The dragon stored in the Gringotts vault, however, was old and near the end of its life after a terrible battle, but Newt didn't know that. "Magical creatures are not your property," Newt said firmly. "I will not let you harm them." Cyrus glanced at the modest suitcase. Inside it were countless grade 5X creatures. If they all turned hostile, even Cyrus might be hard-pressed to handle them without resorting to large-scale destruction. How many dragons or thunderbirds were inside? The box alone could do catastrophic damage. "It seems you have some misunderstandings about me," Cyrus said, "but let's discuss that later." He pushed the suitcase back toward Newt and looked past him. "Those poachers are already moving." Newt took back the case and peered over his shoulder. A cloaked wizard with his face veiled was weaving through the crowd, likely one of the buyers for this shipment of smuggled creatures. "I hope he can lead us to where they're holding the animals." Newt crouched down instinctively to remain concealed. Their quarry spoke in low voices, and the crowd's noise swallowed their words. Cyrus cast a small charm. Extendir's charm. After that, hoarse whispers carried clearly to them. "Where's what I asked for?" a deliberately muffled voice demanded. "You wanted a horned serpent," the poacher replied. "I can't carry it by hand. Those things are on the ship. Docking's unsafe." He chuckled. "Take me there." The buyer was impatient. "No rush. 3,000 galleons. I need the other 1,500 first." The poacher only half smiled. "Catching that big fellow isn't easy. Its skin's tougher than a dragon's. Its horn pierced one of our own. If it weren't for enough dittany, of course you won't have to bear those losses." "Humph." The buyer tossed over a bag unwillingly. 2,000. The poacher accepted it, distrustful, and had a subordinate check the coins carefully. They had seen counterfeit galleons before. After confirming the coins were genuine, the poachers didn't try to raise their price. They'd been doing this long enough to have rules. "Come on." The buyer beckoned and melted into the crowd. In Cyrus's eyes, they flickered, shifting appearances, passing near one person, appearing as another the next instant. After about 10 minutes, Newt stood, ready to use tracking powder, but Cyrus waved his wand. Track reveal charm. Golden footprints sprang up and led them away toward a secluded path. "Let's go, Mr. Scamander," Cyrus said, and without waiting for a reply, he strode forward, following the trail. The tracks ended at an elevated sea cliff and vanished. Cyrus, Newt, and Tina stood at the edge, the view stretching into the dark. There was no sign of the poachers. "Apparition?" Newt guessed. "No, more like a portkey." Cyrus could sense the difference in the air. Apparition leaves one kind of distortion. Portkeys leave another. Portkeys are more strictly controlled, more stable, capable of transporting long distances, even across continents. Smuggling magical creatures and making illegal portkeys, if they're caught, their lives and fortunes won't be enough for the sentence. Tina shook her head. "It's common for poachers to make portkeys. They don't bother with the flu network." Then she looked at Newt, suddenly curious. "How did you get to the United States back then?" "I bought a boat ticket," Newt said awkwardly. He'd done worse. He'd been nearly executed by Makusa. The memory was still bitter. Portkeys were harder to trace than apparition, but Cyrus closed his eyes and felt the spatial ripples in the air. "They must have jumped several times. Hold on to me." Before Newt could protest, Cyrus had grabbed his arm. Tina grabbed Newt's shoulder, her voice a tremor. "You're going to apparate." Then all three were stretched out like a length of rubber, elongated and taut. Snap. Space closed around them. Albania was a good hideout. Lord Voldemort had made it his refuge. There wasn't much choice. Rage filled him at first. He cursed Cyrus and Dumbledore alike, but it calmed. The fact that he still felt himself was proof that Cyrus hadn't destroyed all his Horcruxes. At least one remained. He'd moved Riddle's bones in advance, and the potion for resurrection was nearly ready. He was only one step from being whole again. What he lacked now was a faithful servant. Lucius? The thought came to him, then was dismissed. Lucius had once been entrusted with Riddle's diary, but he had failed. "He only clings to me when I'm powerful. How could he be loyal in hardship?" He muttered other names, Barty, Bella, and felt the familiar ache of betrayal. Of all the Death Eaters, only a handful would be truly faithful. Bellatrix, of course, and Barty Crouch Jr. He had been someone Voldemort trusted, even privy to his half-blood origins and the lowly name he'd inherited. If Voldemort hadn't died before creating his final Horcrux, he would likely have entrusted it to Barty. But now most of his true followers were in Azkaban. Barty was supposed to be dead. Voldemort sighed. He was reduced to inhabiting rats or snakes, waiting. What a pity. Pettigrew's useless, but he's still a helper. He exhaled, resigned. Then a voice drifted through the trees. "I think you might need a little insignificant help from me, Mr. Dark Lord." A young man stepped onto a branch and walked toward the sound, a bright expression on his face. Voldemort, currently possessing a rune spore, flared, thick black smoke rising and forming a human-like face. He watched, astonished. "I thought you were dead, Barty," Voldemort rasped. "No, the one who died in prison was my mother. She saved me." Barty Crouch Jr. spoke without sorrow. His eyes glittered with a manic excitement. He licked dry lips as he held up a newspaper with a wanted poster for Tom Riddle. "You told me about your past and your name, didn't you?" Barty continued. "From that moment, I tried everything to escape. That imposter, he's here, but I'm not gone." Madness danced in his gaze. "Yes, he resurrected before me. You can use my body. It would be my honor," Barty finished, offering himself with a fervor that pleased and startled the Dark Lord in equal measure. Barty's face took on a look of rapture, like a cultist who had just glimpsed his dark god. If the earliest followers of Lord Voldemort, mostly pure-blood supremacists, had been in it for their own advantage, Barty was different. Whether someone was pure blood meant nothing to him. What mattered was that Voldemort's life echoed his own, and that Voldemort radiated irresistible charisma. Voldemort had that power, or had once. For the sake of that man and that cause, Barty would gladly give his life. That did not mean he wanted to be consumed wastefully. A useful tool should be preserved, not squandered. "I will not use your body, Barty," Lord Voldemort said in a hoarse voice. "You must remain with me. We will restore our former glory together. On my path forward, I always need companions." Voldemort did not care for anyone's life. He cared for himself. Yet for zealots like Barty, he knew how to mix cruelty with favors, to make them feel specially regarded. That was how he ensured absolute loyalty, and obedience unto death. Whether he really felt kinship with Barty mattered less than the facts. The more empathetic points he offered, the more utterly his followers would bind themselves to him. "I am glad to have you at my side in these circumstances, Barty," Voldemort said with genuine pleasure. Barty was no Pettigrew. He was competent. His magic was strong. A decade out of school, he already had the skills of a seasoned Death Eater. Even if he had not advanced much since then, he was a capable subordinate. "Not to mention, I will teach you a few tricks, Barty," Voldemort went on, triumphant. "Then we will be reborn. Now that you are back by my side, there is no chance of failure, and we will make those traitors see what becomes of betrayers." "Of course, my great sir," Barty replied, ecstatic. "We must prepare a grand stage to welcome your return. Let them know you are still alive." With a soft, bursting pop, Cyrus, Newt, and Tina materialized on the deck of a filthy ship. The disillusionment charm Cyrus had cast clung to them instantly, rendering all three figures invisible. The sound of their apparition was swallowed by the ocean's roar. Newt and Tina both felt sick. Multiple apparitions in quick succession, made without ever fully touching solid ground, had left them queasy. Tina worried her stomach had knotted itself. Both leaned against the mast and retched a few times. Cyrus set up a ward to stop anyone noticing them, casual as ever. In truth, discovery wouldn't matter much. A few poachers were no match for them. Newt, still recovering his composure, suggested, "We should gather evidence of their crimes and send them to Azkaban." He hated poachers, but Cyrus only half listened. Poachers were vile, yes, but not on the same level as dark wizards. Also, collecting legal evidence was tedious. Cyrus sealed the ship's space against apparition with a quick gesture, raised his wand, and pointed toward the main cabin. The enchanted wooden door exploded inward with a thunderous crack. Deck structures were blasted flat. The lookout wizard plunged from the crow's nest into the sea. Cyrus strode for the cabin stairs. Inside, the poachers and a buyer, no doubt a dark wizard, rushed up, wands already out. "Kid, are you an Auror?" One of them barked, but the poachers didn't wait to answer. A spell shot forward. Defindo, a crescent of silver cut across the air. Cyrus didn't bother to look. He flicked the spell aside and, with a casual motion, sent an invisible whip lashing at the nearest opponent. Another man realized his wand was gone when he reached for his belt. A small brown creature, the Niffler Newt had released earlier, now sat on the railing, gleefully picking at the stolen wand. 7 or 8 wizards surged up the stairs, cramped in the narrow passage and unable to cast freely for fear of hitting one another. Cyrus had no such restraint. He flicked his wand and an invisible, transparent force slammed them back, sending the front man over the railing and the rest tumbling in a clattering heap. He had held back his power up to this point. Not knowing how crowded the cabin was, he'd been careful not to hurt the beasts inside. Newt and Tina exchanged amazed looks. For all their years tracking poachers, and for Newt, how often that had meant facing dangerous creatures, they had rarely had it this easy. Cyrus conjured ropes and bound the mob quickly, then pushed deeper into the cabin. An undetectable extension charm had been in place. The interior unfolded into a space the size of a sports field. A stench hit them so hard it felt like a physical blow. Animal excrement, sweat, blood. Cyrus muttered a spell to block the smell from his own nose, then conjured a huge orb of light and flung it outward. The cabin flooded with illumination. Row upon row of rusty iron cages packed the floor, each crammed with injured magical creatures. Many were near death. A young dragon lay with its throat slit and a tube embedded in the wound, draining its blood. Its eyes were clouded and unfocused. Newt knelt beside the dragon, grief written on his face. "I'm afraid they've been keeping it like this for a long time," he said softly. Directly selling a dragon was risky and illegal in Britain. Draining dragons bit by bit for black market trade was more profitable. Cyrus looked on without much show of emotion. To him, life could be taken as easily as it was defended. Newt put a gentle hand to the dragon's cheek. The creature lifted a heavy lid of an eye and closed it again, too exhausted to respond. Cyrus stepped closer, squatting by the cage. Without preamble, he reached into the wound and pulled the tube free. Blood gushed like a small dam breaking. The dragon shuddered, pain flashing through it, its eyes clearing a fraction as it thrashed weakly in its cramped cage. Heal, Cyrus said, and raised his wand. A powerful healing charm rolled from his tip. Not subtle, not potion-like, but the kind of raw, masterful magic only a truly strong wizard could manage. The dragon's festering flesh knit, granulation crept across the wound, and in moments the throat was whole. Newt's eyes shone, but his relief was tempered by knowledge. Long-term blood loss had sapped the dragon's vital force. Even with the wound closed, the creature might still be beyond saving. Young Mistred, Scamander, you're wrong. Cyrus's voice was quiet. Without my permission, it will not die. And then, to Newt and Tina's shock, Cyrus cut his own palm with a small, swift motion. Bright red blood welled, and he let it drip to the dragon's lips. The effect was immediate. The dragon's chest heaved, its eyes sharpened with new life. The creature staggered to its feet, shaky but alive. It nosed against Cyrus's trousers in a show of clear affection. How is that possible? Tina breathed. Even a phoenix's tears, or the best of potions, did not work like that. Newt stared as if he had seen a ghost. Was Cyrus some kind of living elixir, or possessed of a magical bloodline that worked miracles? Cyrus didn't offer a full explanation. He could not raise the truly dead, but he could pull a life that still clung to the edge back toward living. His palm, which had bled, also began to close. The cut mended as the dragon steadied. Cyrus's phrasing was pragmatic. A small loss of his blood could stave off death, and he had no intention of becoming anyone's walking miracle. In truth, Cyrus's abilities drew on things beyond ordinary magic, the sort of power the Philosopher's Stone promised, but he preferred not to have Newt rely on him as a fount of miracles. Newt, overwhelmed, asked in a rush, "How did you do that?" Cyrus only smiled a little. He'd saved the dragon not out of sentiment so much as to win Newt's trust. The animals were Newt's priority, and Cyrus wanted a friend among them. He moved from cage to cage, stabilizing the worst cases with efficient spells, and then, with another flick, began slipping the creatures into his suitcase. He had transformed it by charm work so it could hold far more than its exterior suggested. Newt's relief showed. Over the years, he had rescued many creatures, but far fewer had been able to stay with him. Even with his own enchanted case, he couldn't keep everything. Cyrus made the same practical decisions. He would not keep large numbers of the same species and had no interest in cruel experimentation. His aim was to study magical bloodlines, not to torment. "We'll take these people to the ministry," Newt said eagerly, turning to Tina. "We'll hand them over to the aurors." Then he looked back at Cyrus, hopeful. "You could come to Dorset. We can talk and give these little ones proper care." Cyrus's actions had erased the suspicion created by his wanted poster. To a man like Newt, someone who cared for creatures was already an ally. Cyrus inclined his head and said nothing immediately, but the invitation and the gratitude in Newt's voice were all the reward he wanted. 167. Obscurus Dorset, in the southwest of England, was the sort of place that made you believe in romance. Long, glittering bays, the beginning of the Jurassic coast, and the melancholy ruins of Corfe Castle. Newt's home lay a little inland from the shore, sheltered from the damp sea breeze, and when Cyrus arrived, he found himself warmly welcomed. Tina, being American, brought a new liveliness to the dinner table that Cyrus appreciated. Newt listened, fork halfway to his mouth, then set it down. "So, what's this about a Ministry of Magic warrant?" Cyrus had already won Newt over by his evident love of magical creatures, but a ministry warrant was no small thing, and Dumbledore had apparently had words with him as well. "They say you're a ghost from 50 years ago. How do you keep yourself so young?" Tina's interest was blunt and practical. Many wizards lived to be 100 or two, but to retain a youthful body was rare without expensive, unsustainable magic. "There's been a mistake, Mr. Scamander," Cyrus answered with a laugh. He had always treated identity as something flexible. "They were looking for Tom Riddle. My name is Cyrus. I only resemble his portrait from when he was young. Besides, he's changed a great deal since then." Newt listened skeptically, but Cyrus's tone was solemn. He didn't deny that the ministry had issued the warrant. He only insisted it was a case of mistaken identity. "For now, Dumbledore and I have cleared up the misunderstanding, at least for the moment," Cyrus added. That was enough. Anyone familiar with Dumbledore knew that if he believed something, it was rarely wrong, and Newt relaxed accordingly. After dinner, Newt led Cyrus into his suitcase. They descended a stairway that opened into a spacious, well-kept house built for tending creatures. The woman who helps Newt in the films wasn't there, but the place was full of motion and life. Once the conversation turned to his menagerie, Newt's reserve vanished. "I have quite a few creatures here. Most aren't terribly dangerous," he said, as if listing them from memory. "This is a kappa. Founded in Australia. Poachers took it from Japan. Be careful, they're vicious. Kappas are water-dwelling, monkey-like beasts that lurk at river edges and can pull people in." Cyrus thought the muggle tales of water monkeys could easily be kappa sightings. They weren't extremely powerful, but they were cunning and aggressive, which is why the Ministry rated them 4X. Newt explained the system. A creature's danger rating considered not just raw power, but habits and the harm it could do to wizards. A Thunderbird might be rated 4X, while a dragon was 5X. Yet in a straight fight, the Thunderbird would not stand a chance. Even within a grade, disparities could be huge. An Acromantula was terrifying, not so much for a single specimen's destructive power, but for what the species could do en masse. "I don't keep the very dangerous ones most of the time," Newt said. "They fight each other, and the territorial ones are impossible to manage." He indicated the kappa, which had been driven ashore by a kelpie in the lake. Bad luck for the creature. They moved through pens and enclosures. A demiguise regarded them with placid, almost melancholic intelligence, soft-furred, serene, unlike the snarling kappa. Most of Newt's charges were rare, some too few in the wild to be sure their species would survive. Then Newt pointed off across a hill. "Look, over there, a Chinese qilin. I thought they were extinct." Cyrus could make it out without the telescope Newt handed him. The bony, auspicious creature stood among the trees like something from a myth. Newt's face darkened as he told the story. Half a century ago, Grindelwald had targeted the qilin. He killed a mother that had just given birth, turned the infant into an inferius, and made it bow to him as a show of power. He'd miscalculated. The qilin had given birth to two. The living qilin refused Grindelwald, instead recognizing Dumbledore. That recognition was part of what set Dumbledore on the path to international prominence. "So this qilin's one of those cubs," Cyrus said. "That's right," Newt replied, the relief and sorrow mingling on his features. He'd tried everything to preserve the breed, but hadn't found another Chinese qilin. New subspecies from Japan had been introduced without success. The creature showed no interest. Cyrus suggested, "You should get in touch with the new Care of Magical Creatures professor at Hogwarts, Rubius Hagrid. He's just taken the post, and he's good with crossbreeding." Newt brightened at the name, but worried Hagrid might not help. Cyrus reassured him. Hagrid loved creatures. Dumbledore would likely make an introduction. Beyond the Keelan's grove, a sweep of snow and ice lay like a separate country. Cyrus's gaze sharpened. "Do you have yetis here as well?" he asked, but Newt shook his head. "I don't keep subhumans," he said quietly. "Come." They crossed a border Newt had charmed, a separating charm that made the air bite colder as they stepped through, and before them lay a lump of black matter frozen into the snow. It looked like tar congealed by frost. "This is an obscurus," Newt said. Cyrus had heard the stories. An obscurus forms inside a young wizard who suppresses their magic so completely that that suppressed power, mixed with anguish, becomes a dark entity. Young obscurials rarely survived long into adolescence. Their magic would eventually erupt and destroy them. Newt's voice softened. He'd been studying obscuruses for years and reluctantly admitted that if a wizard's magic was strong enough, they could keep the thing suppressed. But over time, the obscurus grew too. Newt told Cyrus this one had belonged to a 9-year-old girl. By the time he'd found her, it had reached a point of no return. He had never stopped searching for the cause of their birth. A wizard's spells require will. Magic contains emotion. If those feelings are buried for years, the magic combines with them and becomes this. He spoke as if mourning. The obscurus itself was a quivering mass of concentrated negativity, less a living creature than a wound composed of power and despair. Cyrus stepped closer, eyes glowing faintly gold. Newt moved a half step back, both to give space and because the look in Cyrus's eyes reminded him of the old legends of thunderbirds. Noble, almost disdainful, but not unfamiliar in a world where some wizards were born with unusual gifts. Cyrus did not answer Newt's question. He touched his wand to the frozen thing and closed his eyes. For a moment, images flashed through his mind. The memory snap of Morgana using ancient magic to strip painful feelings from her father's heart over and over. The technique had a name: emotional stripping. Without speaking a spell, Cyrus used his wand the way one might pluck a thread from a tapestry. It was like drawing up a dark, living vein. At the wand tip, a writhing black mass, pustular and disgusting, alive with spite, came free. Newt's face went pale with disgust. The thing at Cyrus's wand hilt was the raw essence of malice. Cyrus whispered, "It's the essence of evil." He recognized it as the same kind of residue Voldemort had used through the goblin Lanloke. Potent, terrible magic that nonetheless looked unremarkable. When that core of darkness left the Obscurus, the mass at their feet wilted as if someone had taken its heart. The frozen lump crumbled into sludge and slumped inert. "How did you do that?" Newt asked, astonished. Not even Dumbledore had managed to remove the darkness from an Obscurus. He could kill or quell one, but not extract its core. Had that been possible, Credence Aurelius Dumbledore might have been saved. Cyrus sealed the extracted essence in a container instead of letting himself be tempted to swallow it. It would be an ideal specimen for study. He intended to keep it. The power left behind by Morgana was significant, and with proper precautions, he could prepare himself against contamination while still using what he found to strengthen himself. He capped the jar and set it aside, the cold wind gusting across the snowy clearing. Newt stood quietly, both relieved and unsettled. For years he had carried the weight of that child and countless questions. For the first time, a piece of the puzzle lay in a small, locked jar. Chapter 168, as everyone knows, defense against the dark arts is a cursed subject. Barty Crouch walked into the Ministry of Magic, as he always did. He wore his square wizarding hat, his suit beneath his robes so stiff it seemed to have wooden supports, and his face was an expressionless mask. Cornelius Fudge's replacement at the Auror office, Rufus Scrimgeour, looked as grim as ever, but the two men projected very different airs. Scrimgeour was all rigidity and purpose, like a younger Barty Crouch. The man people called Barty seemed spent, like a pile of cold ashes. Employees still greeted him as he passed. His reputation had suffered when his son, Barty Crouch Jr., ended up in Azkaban. Many thought he would sacrifice anything for power, but he remained a key official at the ministry, especially at a time like this. "Hey, old Barty," someone called. Barty turned. Ludo Bagman, burly, blond, and grinning, came up the corridor with an easy, almost careless stride. Head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports. Complete idiot, Barty thought. "Good morning, Mr. Bagman," he said flatly, not willing to put much energy into the exchange. "You met me first thing this morning. Saves me the trip to my office." Ludo slipped his arm over Barty's shoulder as if they were old drinking pals. "We'll have to cooperate a lot for next year's Quidditch World Cup." "I will." Barty's face darkened as he shrugged the hand off. "That's my responsibility." "Perfect." Ludo beamed. He had been running up gambling debts, and World Cup-related work could mean some profitable opportunities. As Barty turned to leave, Ludo called him back. "Wait, one more thing." He leaned in and lowered his voice after glancing around. "Did you know Dumbledore plans to restart the Triwizard Tournament?" Barty's ashen expression finally flickered. "When did this happen?" "Just now. I overheard Fudge talking. It was Dumbledore's idea. He's already contacted the heads of Durmstrang and Beauxbatons and reached an agreement. Fudge seemed worried, but if it goes ahead, it'll probably have to wait until after the World Cup." Ludo's tone made it clear he wanted the tournament to happen. Bigger events meant more influence for his department. Barty's mind ran much further ahead. Dumbledore's sudden, proactive push to revive the Triwizard Tournament at this precarious moment could hardly be mere nostalgia. Barty, who in truth was Barty Crouch Jr. inhabiting his father's skin, didn't believe Dumbledore acted without purpose, especially with the Dark Lord's return a real threat. Perhaps Dumbledore intended to use the tournament to contact those other schools to secure friendly ministries before Britain's Ministry of Magic could be compromised. If Voldemort returned, Britain's ministry might be untrustworthy. Forming international ties ahead of time would be strategically sensible. The thought that Dumbledore might be laying groundwork for outside alliances both pleased and worried him. That old man was dangerous. And the timing, after the World Cup, was too far off. The Dark Lord could not wait 6 months. Barty needed faster options to reach Harry Potter at Hogwarts. "By the way, who are the heads of Durmstrang and Beauxbatons?" he asked. "Beauxbatons is run by Madame Maxime," Ludo said with a chuckle, as if still astonished by her size. "A very large woman. Even in the wizarding world, nearly 3 meters tall, was remarkable. Durmstrang's head is Igor Karkaroff. You crossed paths with him before, didn't you? He ran off to Northern Europe once. Never thought he'd end up as a headmaster." Ludo laughed, shaking his head at life's ironies. Barty's expression soured. Karkaroff, traitor, he'd betrayed fellow Death Eaters to save himself. Unlike Malfoy, who later claimed the Imperious Curse to distance himself, Karkaroff had sold men to reduce his sentence. He deserved death, or at the very least to serve the Dark Lord faithfully when the time came. Ludo grinned suddenly. "But his good days might be numbered." "What do you mean?" Barty asked. "A friend in Bulgaria says he might not be in the job for long. Another candidate set to take over." Ludo shrugged cryptically. That didn't surprise Barty. A school like Durmstrang, where the dark arts were tolerated, could be far more useful to the Death Eaters if its head were truly loyal. A controlled magic school would be a steady source of recruits, young wizards molded into a reserve force. The previous crop of Death Eaters had been hampered by incompetents like Pettigrew and Karkaroff. A properly organized institution could change that. And of course, the greatest obstacle to that plan remained Albus Dumbledore. Barty hated the thought of admitting it, but the old man's strength and influence were formidable. Still, Barty had seen the power and the fear Voldemort inspired. His confidence in the Dark Lord was not misplaced. People still paled at the name, even after a decade of apparent death. Barty was capable. Under his father's registered name, he'd handled ministry business with a competence that surprised some. He'd already had Fudge in to discuss the Triwizard Tournament that afternoon, and he'd told the flustered minister, with an uncompromising look, "I will contact the French ministry and our northern counterparts." After sending Fudge away, Barty dropped his official demeanor, lounging in his chair and plotting. The top priority, he decided, was bringing Voldemort back. Without the Dark Lord's presence and the capital he would bring, they could never hope to match Dumbledore. And there were other matters, like that imposter at Hogwarts. He had already arranged for his elderly father to be forced into cooperation through the Imperious Curse. With his father neutralized, Barty could move freely. He set his sights on Remus Lupin. Few outside a small circle knew that the current Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts, Remus Lupin, was a werewolf. The Dark Lord knew. Traitors had handed over his secrets once. Barty had no tolerance for the man who, in his eyes, endangered the school simply by existing. He planned to remove him, or at least control him. That night, he went to the edge of the Forbidden Forest. The Shrieking Shack, the haunted building with its terrible legends, sat alone in the snow. Wolfsbane potion allowed a werewolf to remain conscious during the transformation, preventing the madness that could endanger others. It didn't make the werewolf weaker. A rational werewolf could be even more dangerous. Barty would not face a sober wolf head-on. He wasn't here to kill, only to capture. Wait for the moment when Lupin was at his most vulnerable. He leaned against a tree and waited through a sharp January night, the snow thick and cold. From the window of the Shrieking Shack, Lupin watched the moonlight fade. The potion had done its work. He had remained himself, had watched the transformation. The cost was a new kind of torment, consciousness while becoming what he feared. In old days, he never remembered the change. Now, he had to watch it happen. He stared at the fur on his hands, at the animal's arms that had just belonged to him, and felt sorrow. Snape had brewed Wolfsbane potion for him without rancor, and Damocles Belby's recipe had been a salvation. It kept him from being a danger to others. Yet the awareness it granted made him feel more alien. Dumbledore had trusted him, and that kindness meant everything, but it did not erase the truth. He was an anomaly, a dangerous one. He thought of Sirius and the quiet, happy times with Harry, and of the precariousness of that peace. If his condition were discovered, everything would change. As dawn approached, the hair on Lupin's arms thinned and his bulk began to recede. He felt the skin of his face, less coarse now, and saw the world brighten beyond the window. He rose, exhausted, and left the shack's dark corner where his human, frightened self had curled into a small, shivering shape. He grabbed a handful of snow and pressed it to his face to clear his head. The cold stung and brought him back into himself. He stepped out into the snowy brightness. The forest was silent. Then a spell cracked the stillness. Stupefy. As everyone knows, defense against the dark arts is a cursed subject. Sirius leaned back in his chair, feet propped up on the desk, looking perfectly at ease. Teaching defense against the dark arts for his friend 1 week each month had proven a rare pleasure. Not only did it let him spend time with his godson up close, but the rest of the students at the castle made him feel almost at home. Sirius especially liked the Weasley twins. He thought they had the same reckless flair he and James once had. It was a shame those bright weeks only came around once a month. He'd been thinking about applying to Dumbledore to take the class full-time after the year ended. He'd heard about the so-called curse attached to the post, but Dumbledore had explained that anyone who resigned before the school year's end would be fine. The idea sounded more and more practical the more Sirius considered it. The defense against the dark arts office certainly beat the clutter of his own flat. Speaking of the house, I ought to ask Lupin to help me tidy up, he muttered. Lupin pushed the door open and stepped in. Help you clean what? He asked gently, a faint scar on his face, his usual calm smile in place. Clean my house. Sirius hopped out of his chair and hooked an arm around Lupin's shoulder as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You know what state it's in. 12 Grimmauld Place hasn't been lived in properly for ages. Who knows how filthy it is? Which is worse, it or the Shrieking Shack? Lupin asked with a smile. Obviously the Shrieking Shack, Sirius sniffed. That's a landmark. Besides, you aren't howling anymore. No one's even looking for you there these days. Lupin's eyes flickered, and he smiled. You know people stopped caring about it long ago. Sirius sighed theatrically. Right, this weekend we'll clear out whatever pixies and cobwebs are left and give the place a proper clean so Harry can stay with us over the holidays. Good idea, Lupin nodded, and Sirius clapped him on the shoulder. Don't forget, this weekend, 12 Grimmauld Place. I haven't been back in ages. I need to get supplies. Under Lupin's quiet gaze, Sirius left the office in high spirits. As soon as the door closed, the expression on Lupin's face shifted. Have me help you clean? You're unbelievable, Sirius. The words were not Lupin's at all, but Barty Crouch Jr.'s, hidden beneath his disguise. He had to keep up the pretense. Refusing would risk alerting Sirius. Sirius had said this weekend, but the weekend was only a couple of days away. Barty had received the letter on Thursday, and as soon as Friday's lessons ended, apparated to Grimmauld Place. Between number 11 and number 13, a dilapidated door had seemed to swell up out of nowhere. Dirty walls and grimy windows filled the space as if a whole house had been pushed into existence. Barty's eyes widened. Had someone cast a Fidelius charm? If so, that meant another secret refuge for Sirius and his allies had been exposed, a useful thing to know for the war he served. He climbed the worn, creaky stone steps and studied the front door. Peeling black paint, a silver snake-shaped knocker, no keyhole, and no letterbox. A sudden clanging and rattling of chains announced the door opening. Sirius stood in the threshold, powdered with dust, cobwebs in his hair. You're finally here, he said as if saved by a miracle. I've been busy all day, and I can't even get the kitchen back into shape. He bustled inside and waved them in. Come on in, but don't touch anything. I can't guarantee. Before he could finish, Barty accidentally knocked a scrap of cloth, revealing a large portrait. An old black matron in a severe hat exploded at them in the portrait. Beast! Harlot! Filth! How dare you defile my ancestors' home? Her voice rose into a shriek. That's what I was going to say, Sirius said helplessly, and then, in a deliberately rude voice, told the portrait where to go. Shut up, you horrible old hag! Shut up! The painted woman went white. You prodigal, a stain on this family. How dare you bring such riffraff into the noble house of Black? I said, shut up. Sirius punched the portrait and shoved the curtain back into place, cutting off her rant. The effort left him panting as if he'd run a marathon. I don't think I've properly introduced you. That's my mother. She practically wishes I were dead. Understandable, Barty murmured, though he'd meant the comment in another life. Sirius sank back against the wall, breathing, and then clapped his hands. Right, back to work. I'll finish the kitchen. You tidy up an empty room so Harry has somewhere to sleep. If the house talks, ignore it. That's Creature. One day I'll hang his head on the wall for his insolence. Sirius had indeed ordered Creature to help. The elf outwardly obeyed, but took every chance to sabotage the cleaning, smeared a patch of mud across the wall, muttered under his breath, disappeared when anyone actually looked at him. Barty glanced around as he climbed the warped wooden stairs. Each step groaned underfoot. He pushed open a room and drew his wand. Scourgify. Reparo. He cast a string of cleaning charms, but the grime in the house wasn't only ordinary dirt. It had the traces of magic and creatures about it, which made the stains stubborn. Barty worked through the night, catching glimpses of Creature. Each time the elf muttered insults, but flitted away when anyone tried to engage him. By dawn, the kitchen was much cleaner. Sirius and Barty collapsed onto chairs, exhausted. That Creature is impossible, Sirius complained. If he'd just helped properly, it would be so much quicker. Barty, curious, asked, "Why won't he obey? I've never known a house elf to refuse orders." Sirius's face went serious. "Start with my brother, Regulus." He told Barty, word for word, the story he'd heard, what Creature had told him, about Regulus and the locket. Barty listened, the casual look leaving his face. The scar on his cheek seemed to sharpen as he sat up straighter. "All of that is true? Regulus actually stole something from you-know-who?" His breathing quickened. Barty had not expected that a quick clean would lead to such heavy news. Sirius nodded. "Creature said it might be the Dark Lord's weakness. I was going to tell Dumbledore, and then everything got so complicated." Barty's voice in the kitchen grew insistent. "Creature," he called. The elf appeared in a flash, a filthy rag around his waist and nothing else. He was ancient and weathered, bald but for tufts of white hair around bat-like ears. His eyes were cloudy and red-rimmed, his nose large and fleshy. He sniffed and muttered with a croaky voice. "Smells like a gutter snipe and a criminal. What would the mistress say if she saw you?" "Shut up, Creature," Sirius barked. Creature lowered his head in mock humility. Oh, Creature didn't see Master just now. Then he couldn't help himself and spat out curses everyone could hear. "Disgraceful scum. Enough," Sirius snapped. "I'm asking you where the locket is." Creature stopped mid-insult, eyes wide with terror. "How do you know?" he croaked. "I just know. Give it to me," Sirius demanded, growing impatient. Creature bristled and refused. "No, you scoundrel. That was young Master Regulus's. Creature will not." Barty stepped forward and gently adopted his Lupin persona. He let the mild smile soften his tone. "Creature has nothing to say to a filthy werewolf," he said, imitating Lupin's courtesy, but then went closer. "We know Regulus gave it to you because he wanted it destroyed, didn't he? We know what Regulus did. Did you destroy it?" Creature's chest heaved. At Barty's question, the elf fell apart and finally wailed. "Young Master Regulus's locket. Creature failed. Creature could not do it." "You couldn't destroy it?" Barty's relief threatened to show in his voice, but he clenched his fists, pinching himself to rein it in. Creature collapsed on the cold floor and, between gasps and tears, told the tale. Regulus had been proud of the name, proud to join the Dark Lord. After some time, he had come to the house with a new command. The Dark Lord wanted a house elf. Regulus had then discovered the locket. Its magic was terrible, and had ordered Creature to destroy it. Creature tried everything. There were powerful enchantments on the box and locket, and he believed it could only be broken from the inside. He punished himself, tried and failed repeatedly, kept silent for fear of betraying young Master Regulus's orders. He could not tell the house what had happened. Regulus had made him promise never to reveal the location of the cave. Barty took a breath and stared into Creature's eyes. He softened his tone. "Give it to us. We'll help you destroy it. Then you will have followed Regulus's command." Creature's single-minded devotion to fulfilling Regulus's orders snapped into focus. He blinked, then vanished and reappeared with the locket in his hands, an ornate green Slytherin locket. If this really was the Dark Lord's weakness, Barty felt his heart thud in his chest. Before he could fully process it, Sirius snatched the locket and flung it to the floor, wand already out. Diffindo. The spell cracked through the kitchen like a gunshot. The locket flew and smashed against the cupboard, but when they searched the pieces, it was intact. Barty's chest tightened. Ordinary magic can't break it, Creature said, sorrowfully. Sirius tried several more offensive spells, but none harmed the locket. Maybe Dumbledore could, Sirius suggested helplessly. Barty's gaze darkened for a moment. I don't think that's a good idea, he said. Sirius looked surprised. He trusted Dumbledore implicitly. It was unlike Lupin to question that trust. Barty forced a plausible excuse. Before we hand this to Dumbledore, we should study it. I'm worried destroying it straight away may have consequences for Creature. True, Sirius conceded and accepted the explanation. Barty, breathing slowly to hide the pounding of his heart, slipped the locket into his pocket. My readership has been a little low lately, maybe because my updates have been irregular, so I'll fix that. From now on, I'll update every night at 10 p.m. That gives me enough time to write. Chapter 170, Death is but another adventure. Update at 6 p.m. Lucius had been feeling a persistent ache in his arm lately. Every night when he rolled up his sleeve, the pattern that had long looked like a plain tattoo seemed to come alive. A black snake slithering through the hollow eyes of a skull. He told himself it was just imagination. On closer inspection, the mark looked exactly as it had for the past 12 years. Perhaps I'm just overthinking it, he thought. Still, anxiety hung over the remnants of the Death Eaters like a storm cloud, and even a phantom sensation sent cold shivers through them. The mark only ached. It gave no summons. Don't overthink it. We already know the Master is alive, and he's forgiven our mistakes, Lucius said to calm a trembling Narcissa. By Master, he meant Cyrus. Do you really think he's the same as you-know-who? Narcissa whispered. She had seen the terror Voldemort inspired. That thing could barely be called a man, more a monster, cruel, bloody, absolute. Given Draco's past, the Dark Lord ought to have killed him long ago. There might be a connection, Narcissa pressed, but he can't be the same person. Lucius had noticed the similarities long ago, but it didn't matter to him who Cyrus truly was. He only cared about securing his family's position and status. Who provided that security was secondary. All I know is he's connected to the diary the Dark Lord gave me. If the Dark Lord ever comes for me, I'll have something to bargain with. He wasn't foolish. This was a fallback plan he could use when needed. He knew even that might not save him, but when it came to the worst, he could accept some punishment if it meant protecting what he had. Then why take risks at all? Narcissa asked. Lucius's answer was simple. Whether it was the Dark Lord or Cyrus, to them it made no difference. We can't stand against him, but if we follow him carefully, we can gain more than we have now: status, protection. Power and profit had always been the temptations that lured people into the abyss. He added, Cyrus might not be strong enough to oppose the Dark Lord. We should watch and wait, not act rashly, but we can begin to show the Master our loyalty. By Master, he meant Voldemort. Lucius decided to reach out to old acquaintances, those pure-blood families who had betrayed or distanced themselves from the Death Eaters. They were likely as indecisive as he was. Whatever else, they needed to start atoning for past mistakes. So he wrote 2 letters. Cyrus read Lucius's message, delivered by Owl, and considered it carefully. The black mark on Lucius's arm was starting to ache. Voldemort hadn't yet summoned his old followers, but the ache in the mark looked like a warning, an announcement of his return. Cyrus wanted to bolster the loyal, intimidate the fence-sitters, and instill fear in outright traitors. Lucius is interesting, he thought, openly contacting former Death Eaters to prove his loyalty, yet he still writes to me, playing both sides, as always. The Malfoys had never been subtle. Could Voldemort be on the verge of resurrection? Cyrus wondered. Just then, Newt Scamander arrived. Cyrus folded the letter to keep it from Newt's curious eyes and stood. He and Newt had grown close over the days they'd spent together. Cyrus had Tom Riddle's ease with people and a genuine knowledge of magical creatures. He'd used Nagini to bridge generations with Newt, and the 2 men got along very well. Tina had liked Cyrus, too. She had joked that if she'd had a daughter, she would have arranged a match. Would you like a few of the creatures from my case? Newt offered. Some of the animals Newt had rescued weren't meant to be kept, and Cyrus could take them as he pleased. Cyrus accepted. More magical creatures meant more blood magic for his research. The batch they'd recovered from poachers was already in his case, but Newt's generous donation increased Cyrus's subjects. Dobby would tend them. Cyrus had no problem directing a house elf and even paid him a wage, which made Dobby eager to share house elf magic. Cyrus's research focus, however, remained the obscurus. He had performed a kind of soul surgery. He'd extracted the negative emotions from an obscurus and stitched them to the fragment of Voldemort's soul trapped in the Ravenclaw diadem. When that fragment devoured the emotions, it had grown stronger, eager for more. That piece of Voldemort's soul, misled by Cyrus and somewhat rebellious, had even suggested resurrecting all the Horcruxes. Cyrus had refused. The soul in the diadem would serve as a buffer, a vessel to bear those negative emotions. The diadem's property, clarity of mind and rationality, would help guard Cyrus's own soul from being overwhelmed by emotion. After replying to Lucius, telling him Voldemort was likely close to resurrection and advising him to choose a side, Cyrus went straight to Hogwarts. He found Dumbledore bent over plans for the Triwizard Tournament when a knock at the window announced Cyrus's arrival. Dumbledore looked up and saw Cyrus perched casually on the sill. "I thought you'd come on the day of the Quidditch match," Dumbledore said, springing up to open the window. He'd prepared something for Cyrus, it seemed. Cyrus dropped into the room, teasing Fawkes's beak as he passed and leaning back in Dumbledore's chair as if he owned the place. The portraits grumbled, impotent. "Lucius told me the black mark on his arm has started to ache," Cyrus said calmly. "Is that true?" Dumbledore's face tightened. "It seems your double agent isn't entirely obedient," Cyrus replied with a wry smile, then met Dumbledore's gaze. "Voldemort is using the mark to warn betrayers. He must be confident of his resurrection, and it will be soon." The two of them stood serious and still, like bluestones in a cold wind. "I believe it will happen this school year," Cyrus said. Dumbledore opened his mouth about Harry, then closed it. "You mean he'll use Harry's blood?" Cyrus asked. "The Horcrux resurrection ritual isn't strictly defined. Voldemort could use any enemy's blood, yours, mine, Harry's, any wizard who opposes him." "You know that's not what I mean," Dumbledore said. "He will choose Harry's blood. He always chose Harry that night 12 years ago." "Perhaps," Cyrus allowed. "But regardless, I cannot delay." His eyes flicked to a portrait on the wall. Fitzgerald nodded. "Then let us begin. But I must warn you, my trial is unlike the others. You will face death." "You mean why the password was the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death?" Cyrus asked. Dumbledore smiled sadly. "After this trial, you will see why I'm stronger than Tom Riddle was." "I already know," Cyrus said, and produced a small black object in the palm of his hand, a rhomboid of obsidian that glinted like a tiny black sun. Dumbledore's reaction was immediate and raw. He stepped forward as if drawn by a magnet, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the stone. For a moment, Cyrus expected Dumbledore to snatch it away, but the headmaster restrained himself. He regarded the resurrection stone with the calm sorrow of someone looking at a lifetime of regrets and lost love. "You can't imagine how long I pursued it," Dumbledore said, voice tight. "All because of a fairy tale, but fairy tales do not always end well." Cyrus closed his fingers around the stone. "The Elder Wand is not invincible. The resurrection stone cannot truly bring the dead back. The cloak cannot always hide from death. Even that cloak failed you." Dumbledore's sigh was heavy. The sudden flame of longing had ebbed, leaving him small and dim as a candle in the wind. "Resurrection may not be impossible, Cyrus," he said at last. Cyrus's golden eyes gleamed in the dimness. He imagined a terrible, remarkable synthesis. Summon a soul with the resurrection stone, rebuild flesh with the philosopher's stone, use the Elder Wand and ancient magic as the catalyst, and bind human emotion into the result. Theoretically, it might be possible to reconstruct a person. Dumbledore shook his head, speaking as much to himself as to Cyrus. "We should not toy with the dead, Cyrus, even if we have the means. Life is precious because it is only given once, and death." He paused then, with the familiar calm that had always unsettled and comforted in equal measure, finished. "To the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure." Thanks to Mauschwan for 532 reward points. I'm going to change the update time to 6 p.m. so everyone can read it after work. 10 p.m. was too late. Also, to make the antagonist less dull, I've been strengthening Voldemort a little. Spoiler, there will be a Death Eater breakout later, and the plot will involve 2 Dark Lords. 171, Deathly Hallows, Death is but another adventure. Whether Dumbledore had truly found peace, Cyrus wasn't sure, but he was willing to respect anyone's choice. "Let us begin the trial, Mr. Cyrus," Fitzgerald mused, and then her portrait vanished. A high platform Cyrus had never noticed before appeared behind the headmaster's chair, reachable by a spiral staircase. On it floated a book. "How did I not notice this the last time I was here?" Cyrus wondered. "Because, besides ancient magic, I used some Muggle methods," Fitzgerald said softly. By the time the trial reached this stage, it was enough proof that the candidate had talent in ancient magic, so ordinary concealment spells were no longer necessary. "This book looks like your diary." Dumbledore stepped forward. "You need to enter it with your memories." He looked at Cyrus with a playful expression, as if asking whether Cyrus dared, whether he trusted him. "If you'd prefer, I can leave the office and come back later." "I don't mind you staying." Cyrus chuckled. Dumbledore was calculating, but his character could be relied upon. "If you're curious, I can go in with you." Cyrus opened the book. The memories within, Fitzgerald's trial tale, seemed to unfold into reality. The headmaster's office drained of color, becoming a black and white sketch. Even the phoenix appeared as flowing lines. "How did you do that?" Dumbledore asked in astonishment. Fitzgerald was stunned too. This was her own trial. She had not expected Cyrus to seize control of the book, to assert its sovereignty, to pull her created world into the present and draw Dumbledore into the trial with him. "What's so surprising?" Cyrus shrugged. "I've been in a diary for almost 50 years. He added, however, that the magic affected only the headmaster's office. He couldn't bring the whole world in. "All right, let's begin." Cyrus waved his wand, and the sketched lines erased and recomposed into a new scene. They stood in a graveyard of twisted thorns and bare paths leading toward a grayish-white village. "Do we look like two silhouettes to you?" Dumbledore asked, peering around like a mischievous child. "Please be serious, Albus," Fitzgerald's voice echoed. "Here, just like in the real world, the Deathly Hallows are everywhere." "You mean the Deathly Hallows?" Dumbledore countered. Cyrus noticed him tighten his grip on the Elder Wand, not with fear, but with the unmistakable eagerness of someone wanting to test power. Since this was Fitzgerald's illusion, the Hallows here likely wouldn't exceed her understanding, so their value as indicators was limited. "Miss Fitzgerald, have you personally seen the Hallows?" "Here you can call me Neof," the portrait answered. "I haven't seen the true forms of the Hallows, but through ancient magic and experience I have glimpsed their phantoms. Continue the trial, and you will see. Now find my sleeping body, and be careful not to be discovered by the Hallows. You'd best find a cloak." Her voice faded. Cyrus and Dumbledore crossed the thorns, passed over a stone bridge spanning a dry riverbed, and approached the dilapidated village. Looming above it was a gigantic black figure in a hooded cloak. Beneath it, no flesh, only stark white bones. "Is that the Deathly Hallows?" Cyrus whispered. The shadow was larger than a house, its knuckles as tall as a man. Its hollow sockets scanned the village, permitting no life to escape. Around the settlement, many human-sized black shadows wandered. Cyrus watched as one cast out a chain that pierced a villager's back and took his life. "It resembles the Avada Kedavra curse," Dumbledore observed. "Those slain by the Hallows by chains looked as hollow and numb as those killed by the killing curse." "Perhaps this spell was left by the Hallows," Cyrus murmured. He cast a disillusionment charm on himself. "Let's find the invisibility cloak and then search for Neof." They vanished, deeply disguised, Dumbledore's disillusionment especially profound. Cyrus felt it was almost indistinguishable from wearing an invisibility cloak. "Why don't we just fight our way through?" he asked. "Better not," Dumbledore said. "I don't think we're ready to face the Hallows directly." In Fitzgerald's story, that restraint made sense. They found the cloak with little trouble, eluded the Hallows' gaze, and completed the first stage. The scene dissolved back into ink-splattered white, and a gray stone altar materialized before them. A slender wand floated above it, surrounded by dark, sharp lines as if it were glowing. Neof's cold voice spoke again. "Take the wand before you, and do not waste its extraordinary power." They approached. Dumbledore looked at the wand and then at the one in Cyrus's hand. "You already have one. Do you mind if I take this?" Cyrus asked, though his hand was already reaching for the Elder Wand. "Please." Dumbledore had no reason to refuse. This was Cyrus's trial. When Cyrus grasped the Elder Wand, power surged through him. It felt as if a spring opened in his chest and heat rushed outward. He became acutely aware of extraordinary strength. For a moment he allowed himself a thought. Perhaps he could challenge Dumbledore now. But he did not act on it. The trial's power was illusory, and both holding an Elder Wand in the trial meant neither truly possessed it. Cyrus still knew there was a gap between their real abilities. The setting shifted again. They stood in a ruined castle complex, shadows of the Hallows enveloping the ruins. "This looks like a non-combat situation," Dumbledore said. The sequence made sense. Cloak, wand, next would be the resurrection stone. What did Fitzgerald hope to teach by having Cyrus experience each Hallow's power in turn? Regardless, Cyrus had already forced the first confrontation. He stamped his foot and sent a spell out. The force made the trial world tremble, and the black-sketched enemies scattered like broken ink. More followers of the Hallows rushed in, a swarm bringing death and despair. Under Cyrus's and Dumbledore's combined magic, however, they were only obstacles. Both were far beyond ordinary wizards. With wandwork and ancient magic, they effortlessly cut down many foes. They advanced until a broad platform confronted them, directly facing the great shadow that represented the Deathly Hallows. Its hollow eyes were like black holes. Even knowing it was only a materialized phantom, both men felt a chill. Death itself, how could it be defeated? "Immortality is not the defeat of death," Dumbledore said. "Those who pursue immortality are often prisoners of death. They live in its shadow, in constant fear." He almost named Lord Voldemort outright. Cyrus said nothing. He did not want to die, but neither was he afraid of death. Together, they stepped forward and raised their wands, aiming not at the Hallows' bright servants, but at the Hallows themselves. Black lightning and flames erupted. Even Neof could hardly have expected them to pull the Hallows so directly into battle. Lightning pierced the robe, and flames ignited the hollow bones, but the shadow seemed unharmed. It swept a huge hand, and the magic transformed into wrapped undead warriors that surged toward them. This false death had no direct destructive force. It created minions. Dumbledore flicked his wand like a lasso and hurled a column of fire that became a giant colorless tornado, an elegant, scorching bloom that incinerated the bone-formed undead. Cyrus summoned thunderclouds and unleashed ancient magic in full, shattering the advancing corpses. After much effort, they overcame the second trial. The Hallows' shadow dissolved, and the path to the final trial opened. Cyrus picked up the resurrection stone, not the personal one he possessed, but a stone nonetheless. "Having obtained the 3 Hallows, you can be called a master of them," Dumbledore murmured. "I once sought this power with a friend. How does it feel?" "Like false power," Cyrus answered dismissively. This was Fitzgerald's trial. Even collecting all 3 here didn't prove that one could truly master death. Perhaps mastery was an illusion. One could become a puppet or a tricked plaything. "Or," he added, "why don't you give me your wand and let me feel what the true Elder Wand can do?" "As long as you can defeat me, it will recognize you as its master," Dumbledore replied, steering the conversation. He would not hand over the Elder Wand casually. Without it, his leverage against Voldemort and others would be diminished. They passed through the village again, now void of the Hallows' shadows. The villagers' faces were empty with grief. From their murmured fragments, Cyrus and Dumbledore learned what had happened, or rather, what had been attempted. Using the resurrection stone, the villagers had tried to bring Fitzgerald back. They succeeded in a sense, but failed in the vital way. What rose was a hollow echo, a shell without feeling or soul, carrying only memory. Fitzgerald, awakening from the coffin, was a black silhouette in the sketch, speaking like a machine. "This is why the village fell to the Hallows," she said. "By resurrecting me through the Hallows, they thought they could become masters of death. Instead, they brought disaster upon themselves. The Hallows do not need to intervene directly to take lives. They always claim them in tragic ways." Fitzgerald fixed her gaze on Cyrus. "Even powerful magic, used without restraint, brings only misfortune. The Hallows are like that, and ancient magic is like that too." The path ahead was one Dumbledore could not accompany him on. Cyrus walked alone to a giant stone statue. Everything here, including the pensieve beneath the statue, looked sketched. White tears carved tracks down the statue's face. Cyrus took the memory token from the pensieve and began to watch Fitzgerald's recollections. In her memories, Fitzgerald voiced concern about Morgana's magic. Cyrus noticed, reading Luke Wood's memory, that Morgana had once used her power to help others, but intoxicated by increased strength, she had changed. Gratitude had turned into prejudice, then extremism. Her thirst for power eclipsed everything else. The witch who had once been thankful had become dangerous, her desire for power overriding all restraint. Cyrus felt confirmation of his plan. To use Lord Voldemort's soul as an emotional vessel was the right choice. "I'll use the power," he thought coldly. "Let someone else bear the side effects." The Dark Lord was about to return. Rumors spread through Britain like a plague. At first they circulated only among the Death Eaters who had betrayed him, jittery, guilt-ridden, on edge at every whisper. When the Dark Mark itself began to change and flare, fear swallowed them like a whale swallowing a fish. Malfoy's encouragements pushed the story beyond small circles. Lucius Malfoy held meetings with pureblood families who had distanced themselves since you-know-who's fall, circulating stories and presenting himself as ready to switch back the moment the Master returned. "See," his posture said, "I, Lucius Malfoy, may have wavered, but I will be loyal when you come back." Lord Voldemort had intended the Black Mark to behave exactly like this, to flare visibly, to brand and intimidate, to give courage to those waiting for him, and to terrify those who had betrayed him. Lucius's efforts pleased him in principle. The problem was that the rumor had spread too widely. It was no longer confined to Death Eaters. The talk had leaked into the wider wizarding public and taken on the tone of prophecy. That had advantages. The seed of fear was sown, and if Voldemort truly returned, it would swell into a panic that could eclipse the terror of previous years. The danger, of course, was that the British ministry might prepare for war, and his conquest of Britain would be more complicated. He had luck on that front. Cornelius Fudge, as incompetent as ever, dismissed the rumors out of hand. The minister refused to act, forbade ministry officials from commenting, and instructed the prophet not to report on the matter, so the public could be presented with a picture of calm. Voldemort, across the sea on the continent, read Barty Crouch's dispatches and held one of his tokens in his hand with a cold pleasure. Barty had been useful, efficient, discreet. He made Voldemort think less of Peter Pettigrew, whose clumsiness had cost Voldemort a body 12 years ago and recently caused the loss of Harry Potter. Pettigrew deserved any fate that befell him. Barty, on the other hand, deserved praise. Of course, many of Voldemort's more competent servants were rotting in Azkaban. Others were lost. Lucius had become unreliable, Regulus Black had betrayed him, and Severus Snape, Dumbledore, had stood up for him once, and Voldemort was left with doubts. "He has gained Dumbledore's trust," Voldemort thought coldly. "But is he loyal to me?" The token in his hand, the Horcrux pendant, was not something he wanted to keep close. The body he controlled now, that of old Barty Crouch, was a disposable vessel. If a crisis came, he could abandon it. But the Horcrux could not be thrown away. He hesitated about reabsorbing the fragment of soul in the pendant. From their encounters, deep beneath Gringotts, in the Room of Requirement, and with the destroyed ring, Voldemort suspected Cyrus had increased his power by devouring fragments of souls. Were soul fragments weaker or stronger than a whole? He could not decide. He had started making Horcruxes while still at school, long before he had reached his peak. Had splitting his soul stunted his own development? Perhaps reintegrating it would make him stronger. Still, he could not bring himself to truly regret the murders that made Horcruxes possible. He told himself what mattered most was an immortal body. If he could obtain ancient magic to secure that, his power would rise anyway. He made his way to the school hidden in the far north, Durmstrang. The current principal was Igor Karkaroff, tall, thin, with short white hair and a small curled goatee on a gaunt chin. Voldemort knew Karkaroff well. The man had betrayed friends to escape imprisonment, and Voldemort had a special hatred for such self-interested traitors. This sort of person, when Voldemort returned, would be the first offered in ritual. "Ah, Crouch, old friend!" Karkaroff greeted him with a warm smile that showed no trace of the resentment Barty's old trials might have provoked. The smile did not reach his eyes. He looked pale and worried. We are hardly friends, Voldemort said stiffly in the old man's voice, imitating Crouch's rigid manner. I am here for the Tri-Wizard tournament. Karkaroff adjusted his thick felt hat. Ah, then the competition will be at Hogwarts? He asked hesitantly. According to the order, yes. This year it's at Hogwarts. Then you should speak to Mrs. Rosier, Karkaroff said. He added with reluctance, to be honest, I plan to resign. He had no appetite for Britain. The black mark on his arm burned, and a flood of old guilt and fear returned when he saw Barty Crouch. Resignation, and then a quiet exile, felt like the only safe option. No matter what happened, whether the Dark Lord returned or not, Karkaroff intended never to show himself again. Voldemort knew exactly what terrified him. He despised men like Karkaroff, the sort who cowardly abandoned comrades, yet he had no interest in the quality of his followers. Lord Grindelwald had sought followers. Voldemort ruled through terror. Then please take me to see Mrs. Rosier, Voldemort said. Karkaroff led him to a white-haired witch with a straight posture that betrayed surprising energy for someone who might have been near 100. Vinda Rosier. She introduced herself and shook his hand once, then invited him to sit. The conversation was pleasant enough. Voldemort, playing the part, probed Rosier's feelings toward Hogwarts and Dumbledore. She disliked Dumbledore palpably. That made Voldemort smile inwardly. Dumbledore's enemies were natural allies. With a little influence, he could counter Dumbledore's attempts to seek outside help and perhaps deal him a blow. Then I will take my leave. I still need to go to France, Voldemort said after a time. He rose, bowed, and glanced about. Karkaroff was gone. He did not immediately journey to France. Instead, he began to search for the man he considered a traitor. Meanwhile, in a hidden manor somewhere in Britain, dozens of wizards in masks and black robes gathered. Everyone knew who the robed figures were, but the masks gave them plausible deniability. If caught later, there would always be excuses. The Black Mark's activity is growing stronger. I'm afraid the Dark Lord really is coming back, someone whispered, his voice trembling. Most of the assembled were pure bloods who had avoided Azkaban by claiming Imperius Curse defense. The more obvious betrayers had fled long ago and dared not show their faces. Though we didn't stab him in the back, distancing ourselves from the Master is still a betrayal, Lucius Malfoy murmured. His voice had a pretentious, Severus-esque inflection. He was anxious, but with Cyrus backing him, he felt more confident than most. What we need now is to make amends, Lucius said. I propose we stage an event, something that will make the Ministry tremble, so the Master will know we haven't forgotten him, that we were only lying low until his return. Many nodded. They needed to do something conspicuous to prove their loyalty. Did the Master seek you out? Does he know of you? A dark wizard asked. Lucius shook his head. The Master's most trusted are all in Azkaban. That admission tightened the room. If Voldemort's true confidants were imprisoned, how would they ever prove themselves? A man of one of the sacred 28 families leaned forward. Isn't a few small attacks insufficient? We must atone properly to appease the Master. What do you propose? Someone else asked. The family man's voice dropped. If the Master's trusted are in Azkaban, why not free them and bring them back to the Master? We go in, spring them, and return to bow before him. Wouldn't that speak more loudly than any token show of loyalty? Murmurs of approval ran through the room. They needed a grand gesture. Lucius's face fell. A large-scale raid risked drawing Cyrus's suspicion. Would Cyrus think Lucius was trying once again to demonstrate loyalty to Voldemort? And Azkaban was dangerous in any case. One opportunity is that many Dementors have been moved from Azkaban to pursue Tom Riddle, the family man continued. Azkaban's defenses are probably weakest now. But can you handle the Dementors? Lucius asked quickly. Patronuses aren't the only way. There are darker means to constrain them, another wizard said. They had ways in the dark arts to blunt Dementors, and for Death Eaters that threat was not insurmountable. Then a jailbreak? Someone suggested. A jailbreak! The cries grew louder until the hall thundered with agreement. Dozens of fists rose. Lucius felt a cold wave of vertigo. This was bigger than anything he had intended. He only wanted a way to inform Cyrus without being seen. Then another voice, low and conspiratorial, cut through the excitement. Since we're resolved, why not act now? Catch them unprepared and prevent any leaks. At that, Lucius felt his hands and feet go cold. The room's momentum made retreat impossible. He felt, in his bones, as if he had stepped onto a path from which there would be no return. 173. Azkaban Prison Break. The North Sea was a place of perpetual darkness, like the world's end. Lucius felt as if he had drifted there half-conscious, swept along by a current he could not fight. When he finally focused, the gray tower of Azkaban loomed close on the horizon, skeletal against the sky. More wizards had joined them since they left. What had begun as a meeting of the 28 sacred pure-blood families had swelled with lesser purebloods and even some half-bloods. Everyone wore masks and black robes, darker than the churning sea. "Snape didn't come?" Someone squeezed past Lucius. The voice was swallowed by the wind and spray. For a few seconds, Lucius could not place it. "I contacted him," he managed to say, swallowing. He had intended to send letters, one to Snape, one to Cyrus, but under so many watchful eyes he had not dared. The letter to Snape had been spare. He dared not reveal the plan until he knew if Snape would join them. "We thought he betrayed us," a man spat, disgust flaring in his voice. Lucius said nothing. The sea's cold spray stung like knives. His mind felt blank, as if the black waves were breaking over his skull. Because of that traitor Pettigrew, the Ministry realized the gaps in Dementor security. "They've transferred some Aurors," another wizard informed them. "That's actually to our advantage. Aurors are easier to handle than Dementors." Lucius watched the shadowy shapes of Dementors swirling around Azkaban's ruined tower. Their numbers were fewer than before, but enough to intimidate. "Azkaban already has an anti-apparition charm," someone else said eagerly. "We'll catch them off guard. By the time the Ministry knows, it'll be too late." There was a sudden rustle as nearly 100 wands were drawn. Lucius tapped the silver-topped cane at his side and pulled out the short wand hidden within. "Charge!" someone roared. They swept over the sea on high-performance brooms like a black hurricane. The Dementors, sensing emotion sooner than the Aurors, detached from the tower and descended, their tattered cloaks trailing like lost, filthy souls. "Shoot them down!" The order came. Black spells exploded upward. Dementors could scarcely be killed by ordinary magic, but they were not entirely invulnerable. Missiles of magic struck true. One Dementor recoiled as if hit by a truck and tumbled like a dry leaf, carried by wind and current. Spells came again and again. The Dementors were knocked back, their formation faltering. Lucius kept firing almost mechanically until his arm ached. He barely knew whether he aimed. Some of the creatures were struck down and plummeted into the sea, where the waves carried them away or froze them into the dark water. The Death Eaters adapted quickly. "Bind them," someone shouted. They tossed out everything they could spare, and with a flick, turned those items into ropes, chains, or thorned spears that sank through the Dementors' robes and tightened. Others levitated portions of the sea into separate water prisons around individual Dementors. "Freeze!" came the command, and seawater and captive Dementors turned to great balls of ice that crashed back into the ocean and drifted with the currents. Azkaban's first line of defense collapsed. The Aurors stationed there, numbed by long proximity to Dementors, had only just begun to recover their senses, and they saw Death Eaters pouring down from the sky. "Engage! Contact the Ministry!" one shouted as he lunged for a fireplace. A green bolt crossed the waves before the Auror could establish a flu connection. "Avada Kedavra!" The spell struck the Auror in the chest. His body flew and rolled, eyes wide and empty. Then it was slaughter. The Death Eaters walked over dead Aurors with triumphant smiles. The taste of taking a life at will flooded them after a decade of fear. They had followed Voldemort because they wanted power and superiority. Laws were for the lesser sorts. Lucius blasted Azkaban's main gate open. Bellatrix had expected this day. She never believed her master truly gone. When the black mark on her arm burned again, clarity had returned to her from the madness of Azkaban. But when the gate fell and the freed Death Eaters pressed in, Bellatrix was crestfallen. Outside the gate stood only a group of servants and mid-level followers, cowed and shrouded, offering no sign of the Dark Lord. The figure she had imagined did not appear. Her hands and feet were still chained. Her face was gaunt beneath tangled hair, the hollows around her eyes raw. "Where is the Dark Lord?" she demanded through a rictus of fury. Had he not come himself? Had he deemed them failures and unimportant? 12 years in Azkaban had almost unstitched her sanity. Without proof of his return, she teetered on the edge. She looked like a rabid beast. Lucius, her closest living relative, married to her sister, stepped forward. "The master hasn't shown himself yet," he said cautiously, "but I believe he'll return soon." "Not come?" Bellatrix snorted derisively. Others freed from Azkaban laughed harshly, as if Lucius himself had been spared rather than them. "Does he not trust you?" Rodolphus Lestrange, tall and gaunt, leered in agreement. He was cold and utterly loyal to Voldemort. He had never spoken in his own defense at the trial 12 years before. In his eyes, only the core of the faithful deserved their place. "Traitor," some of the freed Death Eaters snarled. They were eager to execute what they saw as treachery, but had no wands and no authority to pass sentence. Only the Dark Lord could decide. "Don't forget, we saved you," one of Lucius's companions snapped, offended. He and the rescuers feared only Voldemort and did not accept being scorned by prisoners. Bellatrix's laughter curdled, then turned cold. She seized the wizard's throat with withered fingers. He fumbled his wand to her temple, hands shaking. He looked terrified. Bellatrix regarded him with contempt. How could any traitor dare threaten a confidant of the Dark Lord? "The Dark Lord will come back soon," she said fiercely. "Even if it's months, I can wait." She released him and staggered toward the sea, expecting that once news of her escape spread, her master would call her back. But events did not unfold as she had hoped. 3 days after the breakout, the Ministry realized something was terribly wrong. The Aurors at Azkaban could not be contacted. The extent of the escape became public, and the wizarding world was thrown into uproar. Azkaban, an institution that had stood for centuries, had been breached. Even Dumbledore could scarcely believe the headlines. Cyrus did not expect Lucius's operation to amount to such a spectacle. "It happened 3 days ago," he said, estimating the timeline. "Those Death Eaters have been inactive, likely because they don't have wands." Even imprisoned minds, twisted by 12 years, would be eager for chaos. Dumbledore offered another possibility. Or perhaps Lord Voldemort has met with them. Voldemort, Dumbledore reasoned, might be restraining them for now. He had suffered defeats and could not yet risk recklessness. In reconstructed history, Voldemort had first sought alliances and power before striking openly. Only after Dumbledore died had he thrown caution to the wind. Their conversation was interrupted when the office door was pushed open and a black shadow swooped in. Snape entered, grim, clutching that morning's Daily Prophet in one hand and pressing his other to the inside of his left arm. His eyes narrowed at seeing Cyrus in the room. He faltered. "Hello, Severus," Cyrus greeted coolly. Snape looked from Dumbledore to Cyrus, speechless. The double life he led, serving both Dumbledore and the Dark Lord, felt unbearably exposed with both masters in the same room. Cyrus did not linger. He walked to the window and, with a swirl of magic like white mist, rose and vanished into the sky. Dumbledore and Snape watched him go in silence. Snape's mouth opened. Whatever he planned to say died on his tongue. He was left staring at the window where Cyrus had gone, the tension in his arm a fresh, absurd pain. At last, his voice came out thin and sarcastic. "So, the greatest wizard of the 20th century and the most terrifying Dark Lord are in cahoots?" "We have other enemies," Dumbledore replied calmly, as if the world's absurdities did not surprise him. "All right, Severus, you came quickly. There must be something." Snape hesitated, then looked again toward the window and to the Daily Prophet, uncertain whether to speak. Far away in Paris, Lord Voldemort followed protocol and registered himself at the French Ministry of Magic while observing the ministry's workings. It was his first formal step into the French ministry, and the bright, clean interiors contrasted starkly with Britain. His influence in France was minimal, but starting from Paris, controlling French wizarding power and allying with sympathizers like Mrs. Rosier in Northern Europe, offered a promising base. From there, he could press back at Britain, embroil Dumbledore in threats both internal and external, and then pursue ancient magic to finally crush his old adversary. A ministry official approached to greet him. "How do you find Paris?" the wizard asked. Voldemort nodded, his expression almost pleased as he took in the ornate romantic surroundings. "Good," he said simply. "I like Paris." 174. The Final Trial and the Eve of Resurrection. The last step of the ancient magic trial was simpler than Cyrus had imagined. Sen Barca, the dark wizard, still distrusted him, but under the watchful presence of Lord Voldemort, he was forced, reluctantly, to explain the final task. Cyrus had to bring a fierce purple-horned beast to open the door to the Chamber of Secrets. By coincidence, among the magical creatures Newt had given him earlier were two purple-horned beasts. They were terrifyingly powerful. Not necessarily full of flashy abilities, but their hides were as tough as a dragon's, able to deflect most spells, and when they charged, their enormous bulk moved like a locomotive at speed, able to smash mountains and boulders to dust. Now the two beasts knelt on their forelegs and lowered their heads in submission to Cyrus. His eyes glinted with a noble golden light, like a monarch standing over the world. With the beasts, Cyrus opened the Chamber of Secrets and retrieved the last memory and the token stored in the pensieve. Unsurprisingly, the memory concerned Morgana. The witch had finally chosen an irreversible path. She'd cast a spell that extracted the pain from her father's heart. He had become a hollow shell, emotionless, his eyes clouded by a permanent gloom. Morgana did not seem to care. She showed no remorse. Instead, she used the same magic on her students. The immense negative emotions she drew were sealed away with goblin silver deep beneath Hogwarts, like a bloody, endlessly beating crimson heart. The four guardians had tried to stop her, but they could not match her. In the end, Sen Barca cast Avada Kedavra in a sneak attack, killing Morgana and sealing the terrifying power she had collected deep beneath Hogwarts. The place she had chosen lay directly under the Room of Requirement. Cyrus puzzled over one thing. Morgana had extracted the negative emotions from both her father and from Fitzgerald, yet her father had become a numb, living corpse while Fitzgerald seemed unaffected. And the memory made no mention of any irreparable tragedy befalling Morgana's students later on. Was the difference due to whether a person had magic or not? Back in the Room of Requirement, Cyrus asked Fitzgerald exactly that. She denied his guess. "It's not that," she said. "Emotions can't be removed all at once like you peel a fruit. They're like the tides. Morgana's first extraction took away his immediate pain, but only temporarily, like a receding tide when the moon hides. The grief will return." She explained that initial removals targeted single emotions, but if the magic was used repeatedly without restraint, it could strip a person of the ability to feel entirely. Morgana's repeated extractions on her father were what led to his tragedy. "You've completed 4 trials," Luke Wood reminded him. "Before we open the last Chamber of Secrets for you, you must forge the 4 tokens you collected into a special wand." The tokens, created when memories entered the pensieve, had emitted spirals of light and now looked like a fusion of metal and crystal. At the thought of a custom wand, Cyrus first considered traveling to Germany, but that was far. Ollivander's in Diagon Alley would do. It was his first visit there since he had destroyed Gringotts. Gringotts had long since been repaired. The gate Lord Voldemort had blasted off, and the dome opened by dragonfire were restored. But the goblins at the entrance looked morose, as if someone owed them a great debt. They treated everyone with thinly veiled suspicion, as if every wizard approaching with a coin might be a dark wizard planning theft. Cyrus chuckled. It was useful. If goblins eyed depositors that warily, who would trust them enough to put assets back into the bank? He had already left most of the problem to Lucius. It was the future state of the British wizarding world, especially with Voldemort's return, that would determine Gringotts' fate. It was both a risk and an opportunity. "I should have Lucius placed as an undercover on Voldemort's side for a while," Cyrus thought, "and quietly transfer the assets of pure-blood families. Once the Dark Lord purges them after his return, their bank accounts would be ownerless." The more he considered it, the more sensible it seemed. Keeping Lucius at his side was less useful than putting him where he might make Voldemort uneasy, and with Draco and Narcissa under his control, Cyrus wasn't worried about betrayal. He knocked on Ollivander's door. The shop was larger inside than it looked from the street. Thousands of wands in boxes lined the shelves. The old wandmaker appeared and squinted at Cyrus. "Here for repairs?" he asked uncertainly. He had seen Tom Riddle only once at school, and Voldemort's face had changed so much in the years since that he didn't recognize Cyrus. Cyrus pulled out the guardian tokens and explained he wanted a custom wand. He'd already prepared materials. Ollivander stared in wonder. He had never seen such peculiar substances. The tokens were part metal, part crystal, new to him. Wand makers usually relied on dragon heartstrings, phoenix feathers, and unicorn hair simply because those materials worked and had been compared over generations. A wholly new material made Ollivander eager to experiment. He even waived the usual steep fee. The wand would take time to make. Cyrus would have to wait. Meanwhile, at the manor where the Death Eaters had gathered, the mood was tense. Bellatrix and the others who'd escaped from Azkaban felt tormented and anxious. They had assumed their escape would earn the Dark Lord's immediate summons, but no call had come. The black mark's pain on their arms intensified every day, yet imagined summons remained absent. Those who had once betrayed them now mocked their return. Bellatrix drew her wand and punished one such mocker, and Lucius, after much effort, had retrieved their confiscated wands. "Why hasn't the master contacted us? Is he angry about our failure?" Augustus Luke Wood paced the manor, fretting. After Voldemort's fall, their ranks had collapsed. Many loyalists hadn't surrendered, but had nonetheless lost hope. "Perhaps the master simply doesn't know we're back yet," someone offered. Bellatrix snapped. "I said we should have used Morsmordre back then. We'll go to the ministry, slaughter those aurors and officials, then raise the mark." She spoke as if it were decided and strode for the doorway, but an older voice stopped her. The man, about Voldemort's age and one of his earliest followers, alive perhaps only because the prison break had come earlier than in the original timeline, held open a copy of the Daily Prophet. On it was a wanted poster, Cyrus's face. "The master hasn't summoned us because he has his own plans," the old wizard said. "As the master said, he has gone further on the path to immortality than anyone. 12 years ago, everyone thought he was dead, but now he has returned." He tapped the paper with a withered hand. Even though Voldemort's appearance had changed greatly in the past 20 years, the resemblance in the poster was still clear enough to catch the Death Eater's attention. He folded the paper and added, "We must wait quietly for the master's summons, not jeopardize his plan." Bellatrix's dissatisfaction remained, but she dared make no rash move. Then a sharp voice cut through the room like an eagle among ducks. "A rational suggestion, Mr. Bulstrode." A gaunt, scarred, disheveled man had appeared among them. Nearly 100 Death Eaters went on high alert, raising wands. "Remus Lupin?" Lucius's pupils constricted. He had not expected such a face here. Had Dumbledore discovered them? But the man's face rippled, the swell of skin, the features shifting. "Remus Lupin. No, it's me, Barty Crouch." In moments, the man took on the familiar face of Barty Crouch, one of Voldemort's trusted allies. The revelation hit them harder than the arrival of Lupin would have. Wands stayed raised. Some even sparkled green at their tips, ready to strike. "Barty Crouch is dead." Rodolphus growled and stepped forward. They all remembered the Barty who supposedly died in Azkaban, but Barty laughed softly. "Can you be sure the one who died was truly me?" he asked. He reminded them that if someone dies while under a polyjuice potion, they don't change back, suggesting the executed prisoner had been a decoy. The real Barty had escaped Azkaban 12 years ago. Anger and distrust flared among the Death Eaters. "You were out of Azkaban all that time?" Bellatrix demanded, grabbing his collar with nails twisted by long torment. "Why didn't you go find the Dark Lord?" "Since my escape, I have served the master," Barty said, showing no fear, only a touch of disdain. "I heard of your escape from the newspaper. Who planned it?" His tone accused those who'd bragged. Lucius stepped forward and admitted responsibility. Barty regarded him with a curious look, a mix of surprise and approval at his nerve. Then he warned them bluntly, "The master is carrying out his plan. He will not have any foolishness cause failure. Until you receive the master's summons, do nothing." He ignored Bellatrix's fury and apparated away. Barty reappeared at Hogwarts and made a few hurried exchanges before returning with news. "The master has returned from France. The potions and body for his resurrection are ready. That useless Karkaroff is no longer a factor. With just Harry Potter's blood, the master will be reborn." He spoke with trembling excitement, licking his lips as if he could not wait. Back at the manor, Bellatrix and the others took him to meet Cyrus. Harry felt as if he had become a snake, sliding through a damp, twisting cave. In his narrow, tunnel vision, a shadowy wizard stood before him. Not far away, another pale-faced wizard lay slumped on the ground, his face contorted with fear. "I'll do it, Crouch, I will," the wounded man begged. "Of course you will, Karkaroff, or you'll die," came a cold reply from a different voice, one Harry somehow found familiar without knowing why. Before he could sort it out, a third figure in the vision, Barty, spun his wand down and drove it toward Karkaroff's chest. "Crucio!" he shouted. Karkaroff writhed and thrashed, his clothes soaked with sweat. Watching it made Harry sick to his stomach. The pain in his scar flared as if the tortures at Luke Wood's castle had returned. Hot, knife-like agony ran through him. Then he heard something that stole his attention from the pain. "You reported me, didn't you?" Barty's voice was cold. "Said I tortured the Longbottoms with Crucio. Longbottom." Harry thought immediately of his chubby-faced doormate, Neville. He had never heard Neville speak of his parents. In the vision, Barty's hatred drove him to repeat the Cruciatus curse on Karkaroff. Karkaroff, it seemed, had told lies to lessen his own sentence and accused Barty of torturing the Longbottoms. Barty cast spell after spell. Karkaroff's face went ashen, his eyes rolled back. White foam flecked his lips as his body convulsed. At that moment, another voice rang out, familiar to Harry, but just out of reach of memory. "All right, Barty, if you torture him to death, our plan won't be completed." The wizards in the vision were clearly plotting something. Harry wanted desperately to hear more, but then one of the men suddenly turned as if sensing someone watching, and his snake-like eyes locked onto Harry through the dream. "Harry Potter!" A searing pain split the scar on Harry's forehead as if an axe had struck it. He snapped awake, gasping in the darkness. "What's wrong?" Ron mumbled as he sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Another nightmare?" "Yeah." Harry clutched his forehead. "I dreamt someone was torturing someone else in a cave." The other three boys in the dormitory were awake now. "How many times has this been?" "I think you should talk to someone about it," Ron said. He didn't name him, but Harry understood he meant Cyrus. Harry hated to bother Cyrus constantly, though. He didn't want to be a nuisance. "It's probably just a dream," Dean said, practical and unconcerned. "Go back to sleep. Don't forget potions tomorrow." But a dream could be checked. Harry looked over at Neville, who still seemed half asleep and bewildered. Except for seers, people almost never dreamt of faces they'd never seen. Even strangers in dreams were typically people you'd seen somewhere without remembering. Harry could ask Neville about his parents and find out if the vision meant anything, but he couldn't bring himself to. Neville had never talked about them. If the dream were real, bringing it up might hurt him. "I'm fine. Go back to sleep." He lay back down but didn't sleep. Ron was probably right. He should tell someone. Dumbledore or Cyrus would have to know. He thought of Sirius, but Sirius only came to Hogwarts briefly each month. Lupin was the other person he trusted, someone he felt he could talk to without being judged. He considered it all night. In the morning, his eyes were ringed with dark shadows. The nightmare clung to him in vivid detail. Ron had already told Hermione and Ginny, both urged him to tell Cyrus. Ginny even reached for her diary to make a note, but Harry stopped her. "It's just a dream," he kept saying. After the dull torture of potions class, exhaustion wrapped around him like a python. He staggered through the corridor, textbooks in his arms, and bumped into someone. Books scattered across the stone floor. "Sorry," he muttered. "Don't worry." The man's voice was gentle, a flick of a wand, and the books jumped back into Harry's arms, one by one. "Professor Lupin?" "You look exhausted, Harry," Lupin said, smiling with concern. "Those dark circles aren't good. What's wrong?" Harry shook his head, trying to sound casual. "Just nightmares, for days." "Nightmares? The same dream every night?" Lupin's expression grew serious, and Harry felt a prickle of worry. He told Lupin the truth. Snakes sometimes, a baby once, and the previous night a cave with a wizard named Crouch and another named Karkaroff. "Always," he said, his scar burned when he woke. Lupin's face tightened. "This isn't a small thing, Harry." He said the name the others always avoided, you-know-who, quietly, then met Harry's eyes. "Snakes are the sign of Slytherin and of him, and Karkaroff was once a Death Eater." "Crouch, too," Harry added. Lupin looked puzzled. "I only know one Crouch. He was the Minister of Magical Law Enforcement. He was uncompromising toward Death Eaters. He even sent his own son to Azkaban. Harry compared ages and realized the Crouch in his dream might not be the same man Lupin knew. Lupin's concern didn't lessen. "Come to my office and sit down. Have a cup of tea. You won't be much use in afternoon lessons like this." Grateful, Harry followed him. Lupin's office felt colder, darker than the last time Harry had been there. Lupin handed him a steaming cup. Before Harry could speak, an old, battered box nearby thudded as if something inside was trying to break out. Harry startled. "Don't worry." Lupin reached over and pressed his hand to the box, muttering a spell. The thudding stopped. "There's something dangerous inside. It's best not to look." "Magical creature?" Harry asked, trying to break the tension. "Not a werewolf, I hope." Lupin's classes had involved many creatures, boggarts, grindylows, and that had been comforting. "Perhaps you guessed right," Lupin said with a weary smile, and then steered the conversation back to Harry. "Your scar was caused by him. If it's hurting again, something is happening, and has it ever hurt like this before?" Harry ran through the history. Quirrell in his first year, when the head on the back of Quirrell's head made the scar burn. The basilisk episode in his second year when he was controlled. Cyrus controlled the basilisk, Harry said, because it was true in his world. "Cyrus and you-know-who are connected?" Lupin murmured. "Your scar is probably linked to him. We need to take this seriously." He paced, thinking. "Come see me this weekend. We'll try to do something about the scar. If I can't, we'll tell Dumbledore or Cyrus. I remember Cyrus is your friend." "Okay," Harry breathed, relieved to have a plan. He left the office lighter than before, but as he closed the door behind him, a thought crept up his spine. Lupin's expression had been odd, quieter than usual. He glanced back, but the office was empty. Inside, the man who had taken off the relaxed mask of Professor Lupin was not Lupin at all. It was Barty. "Just as the master said," he murmured, somber and calculating. "Harry saw what happened last night." Barty set aside his private doubts and plucked a small object from his pocket. He pointed his wand and whispered, "Mentos." The object gave a faint blue glow and trembled like a suspended coin, then settled. Far away in France, Lord Voldemort watched the progress of his plans. He had desired France as a stronghold, but resurrection took precedence. Power could wait. He had abandoned the corpse of old Barty and returned instead to a new, terrifying infancy, snake-faced and small. Karkaroff held that helpless, dangerous thing in his arms. There was no delight in the infant's vulnerability. Any slip could end with Karkaroff's neck in those tiny hands. Barty had put a Fidelius charm on him. Any betrayal would be fatal, and loyalty might be the only route to survival. "Don't worry, Karkaroff," the baby hissed weakly. "I will remember your help." Karkaroff remained unmoved. Voldemort's promises had little weight for him. He judged survival more important than loyalty. "Remember," Voldemort whispered, "when Barty brings Harry back, put that necklace and me into the cauldron." He had not intended to recombine the soul fragment with his body. The Slytherin locket was a last insurance. But last night's events suggested a new possibility. Perhaps Harry Potter himself was one of his Horcruxes, an accidental Horcrux made when he killed Lily. If Harry were a Horcrux, as long as he lived, Voldemort could not truly be destroyed. He could kill Dumbledore, make another Horcrux, and then kill Harry. The order would change, but the outcome could remain the same. 12 years ago, he had been undone not by Harry or Lily alone, but by ancient magic. If Harry's role was only to enable his return, so be it. Voldemort watched the bubbling cauldron and felt his hatred and ambition swell. "I will return stronger," he promised himself. 176. Death Eater's Call. It took Cyrus several days to get that peculiar wand from Ollivander. The wood was impossible to place, and a blue crystal sat set into its center. When Cyrus held it, his magic felt sluggish, clogged as if some filthy sewer had been shoved into his veins. As the Guardian had warned, this was not a wand for everyday use. It behaved more like a key meant only for the secret vault. Cyrus was about to head for the Room of Requirement's subterranean cavern when a sharp thought cut into his mind. Lupin betrayed them, and Harry has been taken again. Time snapped back to earlier that same weekend. As arranged, Harry had gone to find Remus Lupin. Hermione and Ron had wanted to come with him, but Harry had refused. They didn't distrust Lupin, but they worried. That scar was the mark of you-know-who, and however good Lupin was as a professor, He was no Dark Lord. Don't worry, Harry insisted. Professor Lupin's just going to look at the scar. If he can't fix it, he'll tell Cyrus or Dumbledore. Remember, if it can't be solved, go find Mr. Cyrus, Hermione said with forced cheer. She and Ginny were especially anxious. Harry had been having nightmares for 2 nights, and they were getting worse. Where earlier he dreamt of snakes, now he dreamed of a baby with a snake's face, eyes full of malice and an awful, cunning intelligence, Lord Voldemort. Ron offered a grim theory. If he's turned into a baby, maybe he's resurrected already. He might not need 10 years to grow up either. What if he just comes back fast? The thought made all of them uneasy. Hermione and Ginny urged contacting Cyrus directly, but Harry wanted to see Lupin first. He argued that if Voldemort truly intended to come back, a few days wouldn't change much. So with tired, pale features, Harry knocked on Lupin's office door. "Come in." The office was darker than usual when Harry opened the door. For a moment, a thin figure leaned heavily on a chair, face blurred in shadow. The chill in the room snapped Harry alert. Something felt off. But the figure stepped forward, and the familiar face of Professor Lupin appeared. "Sorry," Lupin said softly. "I forgot to turn the light on, but we don't need it today. We're going into the Forbidden Forest." He carried a packed suitcase and looked as if he were ready to leave for a long journey. "You look like you're going away," Harry joked weakly. Lupin nodded with a seriousness that prickled Harry's skin. "Perhaps. I'm taking you to you-know-who so he can directly touch your scar." Lupin parted Harry's hair to show the mark. The scar was red, swollen, and inflamed, the skin around it ruined. "Has it been hurting?" "Non-stop," Harry admitted. Lupin's face grew graver. "From what you've told me, the scar is linked to Voldemort himself. When his emotions spike, your scar reacts. If it's been hurting like this, I'm afraid it isn't good. He must have a plan. He's probably near success." Harry's mind jumped to Ron's guess. "Do you think he's already resurrected?" "If so, he'll have summoned his Death Eaters," Lupin said. "But I suspect he's almost there. Maybe only one last step remains." Hearing it from Lupin made the possibility hit harder than when Ron had said it. "Maybe we should find Dumbledore." "He isn't at Hogwarts." Lupin's voice was terse. "He was called away to the Ministry on international business." It had been a trap, Cyrus realized. Dumbledore had been lured out by the Triwizard affair, exactly how Voldemort and his allies had planned. Lucius and Barty had worked to sever the Floo communications so that day the Ministry would be cut off. By the time Dumbledore realized, the Dark Lord might already have returned. "What about Mr. Cyrus?" Harry asked. "No need to rush." Lupin shook his head. He was careful not to let news reach the wrong ears. If Voldemort planned a public resurrection, he'd want to humiliate the imposter Cyrus before the Death Eaters, use Cyrus as proof of his own power, and to seize ancient magic. "The priority is your scar. We'll look for forest herbs." Lupin took Harry's hand, and they went out. The heavy snow had melted. The Black Lake's surface was no longer frozen. The wind bit cold and damp, but with Lupin at his side, Harry felt safer than he would have alone. Forest creatures aside, a professor's presence steadied him. They passed Hagrid, who cheerily invited them for tea and rock cakes. They politely declined. Inside the trees, the wind wedged between trunks and made Harry pull his shoulders in. Lupin cast a warming charm. "Cold repelling," he said with a brief smile. "A spell Snape invented. He had a lot of clever ideas. James used most of them to bully him back then." Harry brightened at the mention of his father, but Lupin's tone sobered. "Don't be proud. Bullying is never the right thing. We did many foolish things. I regret them." Harry's indignation flared in a different direction. "But Snape deserved it. He hates me. I'm sure, if Voldemort comes back, Snape will try to kill me the first chance he gets." "It's Professor Snape." Lupin only emphasized the name, offering no confirmation or denial about his loyalties. Snape had been a double agent once. Whether he still served the Dark Lord was a painful question. For now, the one thing certain was Snape's dislike of Harry. They walked deeper. The ground opened into a wide hollow, scarred black and twisted as if by fire, perhaps the remains of an acromantula nest. "We're here," Lupin said, setting down his suitcase. He tasted dryly, and his expression shifted. His voice changed, familiar, yet wrong. Harry's hand reached for his wand, instinctive. Red light struck it first. A spell ripped Harry's wand from his grip, and it landed in Lupin's hand. Expelliarmus! Professor? Harry's instinctive trust crumbled into confusion and alarm. He fumbled in his pocket where Cyrus's fake galleon lay, a new one Cyrus had made after Voldemort had destroyed the first. The device would signal Cyrus if Harry poured magic into it. But the imposter moved too fast. The galleon flew out of Harry's pocket and was shattered in midair. "You're clever, Harry, but foolish," the false Lupin sneered. His face melted, skinned and reshaping, into someone from Harry's nighttime visions. Barty Crouch Jr. Crouch, the voice Crouch. Harry spun and ran. Spells outraced him. Barty waved his wand. 2 thorny briars erupted and wrapped Harry like steel cables. The vines tightened, their thorns tearing flesh, blood spattered. "The Master doesn't want you dead yet," Barty said, enjoying the cruelty, "but you'll suffer." "Ashio, Harry." Bound and helpless, Harry flew to Barty's feet. Barty kicked out a foot, forcing his heel into Harry's chest, grabbed his collar and hoisted him up. The suitcase clicked open. Inside was only an ordinary cup, insignificant at first glance. Barty reached for it. Snap. The forbidden forest emptied in an instant. 10 minutes later, invisible creatures had been drawn to the scent of blood and lingered where Harry had been. A moment later, a sound of wings folding echoed overhead. A golden eagle descended. When its wings drooped, they shimmered and became a trench coat. Cyrus stepped down from the sky in human form, golden hair catching the light, and looked up at the astronomy tower where professors and Harry's friends waited. The 4 heads of house were there. McGonagall sharp with worry, a disheveled Lupin, recently rescued from a locked cupboard in his office, missing a clump of hair, and an anxious Sirius. "Cyrus, Harry's been taken," McGonagall cried. She had suggested finding Cyrus. She didn't fully trust him yet, but she would prefer an outsider's help to losing a student. "We can't reach Dumbledore. We need you." Sirius turned to Cyrus. "The fake galleon you used to contact Harry last time, can it locate him?" "No, the other one must have been destroyed. Cyrus had already tested it. He asked what had happened. Lupin, still weak and shaken, had been found in a cupboard, his appearance ragged. Barty Crouch Jr. has been impersonating me this semester." He took Harry. "Now isn't the time to argue about who's right and wrong," Cyrus said, voice low. Without the galleon, he didn't know where Harry had been taken. Snape, who had been standing silent, suddenly clutched his arm. Sweat ran down his temple. His expression went flat as someone hearing a monstrous summons. He stared at Cyrus with a terrible, dead intensity and said in a voice that made everyone freeze, "He's summoning me. He's calling me." Snape rolled up his sleeve, and the black snake coiled around the skull on his arm seemed to move, its head sliding into the socket of the skull. "What do you mean?" Ron asked, still not understanding. Hermione clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide. "That's the dark mark. Only Death Eaters have that," she whispered. She stared at Snape in disbelief. Nobody liked him, true, and even Harry had never thought Snape was a Death Eater. He had always trusted you-know-who. "Let me correct you on one thing," Sirius said with a sneer. "Only Death Eaters trusted by the Dark Lord get one of those." It was true. Voldemort did not brand everyone. Some were beneath him, werewolves, other wizards, whom he considered disposable rather than servants. But no one dwelt on that now. Snape ignored the taunts and simply looked at Cyrus, waiting for Cyrus's decision. Should he return to the Dark Lord's side or remain hidden? Should he reveal everything or continue to lie? Cyrus made his choice quickly. He did not speak, but he looked straight into Snape's eyes. "You come with us, then attack me," the thought said directly into Snape's mind, unheard by anyone else. "Of course, I don't think he'll let you do it." What Snape needed now was to prove his loyalty to Lord Voldemort. With Dumbledore still alive, Voldemort needed someone on the inside. Not many could pull that off, and this was not the time for Snape to be exposed. Cyrus had no intention of interfering with Dumbledore's arrangements for now. The problem is, how do we find them? Sirius stamped his foot. At that moment, a tall figure came tearing through the astronomy tower door, nearly stumbling in. It was Hagrid. "The Thestral found Harry's blood in the Forbidden Forest," he panted. Before anyone could react, black shapes swept across the night sky. They looked like skeletal horses with dragon heads and huge bat wings, mounts of death. "What?" Hermione looked toward the window but saw nothing. Ginny and Ron stared, terrified. Thestrals could only be seen by those who had witnessed death. Hermione had not, so they were invisible to her. No one answered. Sirius was the first to climb onto a Thestral's back, like a knight mounting for war. "The Thestral will lead us to Harry by the scent of blood," he declared. To Hermione and the others' astonishment, he and Hagrid mounted the invisible creatures. The Thestrals spread their leathery wings. The wind set the planetary models in the astronomy tower spinning. "Wait, we're coming too," Ginny said, gripping her wand and stepping forward, eyes locked on Cyrus. "I can fight Death Eaters. You taught me how to fight, didn't you?" Cyrus noticed how Ginny had grown. She had matured, features sharpening, skin as pale as snow. To him, she was still a second year, but she was no longer a child. "You must stay in school," Professor McGonagall said firmly. Even Sirius didn't support their venture. "We're facing you-know-who and the Death Eaters. They kill without blinking, children. This is not a game." Hermione, Ron, and Ginny paid no attention to the protests. They stared at Cyrus until he shook his head. "No," he said. Once Lord Voldemort returned, even he would not be certain he could defeat him. He could not take the risk with children. "It's late. Go back to your dormitories. Tomorrow morning you will see Harry." He spoke like an order. The three children hesitated, especially Ginny. She had fought and even killed before. Perhaps Cyrus had underestimated her. When she met his gaze, though, all resistance drained away, as if his words were law. She lowered her head and reluctantly followed the others out of the astronomy tower. Before the door shut, she looked back, pout and grievance plain on her face. "Only Harry? And me." Bang! The door slammed. Bang! The air tore open, and a small black hole spat out Barty, carrying a wounded Harry. He threw Harry onto the muddy ground. Harry was tied all over and could not move. He tried to look up. Above him, a huge cauldron swung, and the pale, gaunt wizard from his dream, the one who had haunted his nightmares, crouched by the cauldron, clutching a small bundle. Using his wand, he traced runes along the bottom of the cauldron. A large, three-headed serpent slid back into the darkness. "You're back, Barty," a voice said. The parcel in Karkaroff's arms stirred, producing a rasping sound like claws on glass that set Harry's teeth on edge. The thing inside pushed its head out. It was slimy and eyeless, ugly and small, like a baby but without hair, its skin covered in tiny snake-like scales, dark red like raw flesh. Its face was serpent-like. Harry knew at once who it was, Lord Voldemort. He had seen Voldemort in many forms, but never more pitiable, as if the thing could be strangled easily. Yet Harry also knew that this weakness was a mask. If Voldemort completed the revival, he would be more dangerous than ever. "It went smoothly, my master." Barty said, delighted, "You never disappoint me." Voldemort's voice was cruel and eager. The eyes Harry had always seen in dreams, narrow slits with vertical pupils, fixed on him. Harry felt a lightning pain at his scar. His blood ran cold. "It seems my appearance has unsettled the boy who lived," Voldemort purred, tone contemptuous as if Harry were a joke. "Well, Harry, we'll settle this later." The potion in the cauldron boiled faster. Sparks flashed from its surface like diamonds. "It's ready, master," Karkaroff croaked, his voice hoarse as if from weeping. He trembled with fear. His hands shook. "Now, put me in." Karkaroff carried the bundle to the rim. The sparks cast stark light on his flat, evil face as he lowered it into the cauldron. Voldemort sank into the potion. For a moment, Harry almost prayed the thing would drown, but that was absurd. Voldemort would never let his servant kill him. Karkaroff shut his eyes and raised his wand to the sky. "Bone of the Father, unknowingly given, you will renew your son," he intoned. Harry saw a wisp of dust lift from a rotting skeleton nearby and drift into the cauldron. Only then did he register the skeleton beside him. Years of decay, a stink of death about it, features long gone into rot. Bone of the Father? Was this Voldemort's father? Harry could scarcely believe how callous they were to treat a human, even a dead one like this. The potion's surface cracked with a hiss and flared into vivid blue. Barty grinned and dragged Harry to the cauldron's edge. The rim was scalding. Harry's skin reddened and steamed as the boiling potion threatened to splash into his eyes. "Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken. You will revive your foe," they chanted. Harry could not stop them. He was tied too tightly. He struggled, but a dagger's tip flashed and pierced the flesh of his shoulder blade. Blood streamed down his torn sleeve and dripped into the cauldron. The liquid flashed brilliant white, Sparks flew like diamonds, so blinding that the world seemed to blacken around them. "You have completed your great task, Harry," Barty shrieked, more thrilled than when he himself had been freed. He threw the dagger aside, gripped Harry's head and forced him to watch. "Behold, the great Dark Lord is reborn." "He won't succeed," Harry bit out silently, but it was useless. The sparks died. A plume of white steam rose and clouded Harry's view. Through the mist, a black figure rose from the cauldron, thin and tall as a skeleton. The fog turned to a gauze and then to a black robe that hung over the figure's bones. The three-headed serpent had slithered to the figure's feet and lay submissive. "You are mistaken, Harry." The thin man stepped free of the cauldron. He held his gaze on Harry. Harry saw the face that had haunted him for 3 years, paler than a skeleton, with huge red eyes and a flat, snake-like nose, nostrils thin as slits. Lord Voldemort had returned. He did not spare Harry a greeting. He examined his own body, and with a small, sinister flourish drew a wand from his robe, the very wand he had used before. Barty threw Harry to the ground and prostrated himself at Voldemort's feet, leaning low. "How do you feel?" he asked. Voldemort closed his slit eyes and savored the sensation of a real body. "Better than ever," he said. After merging with the soul fragment from the pendant, Voldemort felt his power return a little, only a trace, but tangible. Since his school days, he had never known a complete soul. He had disfigured himself, but gained power as he rose. Now, he had reclaimed a sliver of his former strength. His only regret was having been reborn with the flesh of such a traitor. He glanced at Karkaroff with contempt. "You should have used my flesh," Barty began at once. "Of course not, Barty. I want you to remain whole," Voldemort replied with arrogant expectation. He walked barefoot across the dark mud. Karkaroff looked at him with pleading eyes. He held out a bleeding, severed hand, beseeching salvation. But Lord Voldemort was not merciful. Cold as a corpse, he said only, "The other one." Karkaroff froze. Voldemort made no more sound. He only motioned as if pulling on an invisible rope and hauled Karkaroff's other arm forward. Then he rolled the sleeve up past the elbow. Harry saw stamped on the skin a vivid red mark, a skull with a snake emerging from its mouth. The Dark Mark. Voldemort looked at it with something like nostalgia, remembering past days. The power, the screams of muggles, the Death Eaters prostrate at his feet. "They will all know you have returned," Barty cried, ecstatic. "Lestrange, Lucius, Flint, they are all waiting for your summons, sir." Voldemort's lips twitched into a cruel sound. He pressed his long, pale index finger to the mark on Karkaroff's arm. Harry's scar screamed in pain, and Karkaroff howled. Triumph settled on Voldemort's face. He straightened, tilted his head back, and scanned the dark sky. "Waiting for my summons," he murmured, eyes glowing red and fixed on the stars. "But once they feel it, how many will have the courage to return, and how many will be foolish enough not to come?" 178. It's time to choose your allegiance, Death Eaters. The summoning spell had worked. Death Eaters were coming, but it would still take time for them to pinpoint the location. Waiting felt like a dull, anxious curse that only time could lift. Harry Potter. Lord Voldemort used the lull to walk over and examine the boy who had once shattered his soul. So ordinary, he thought. An ordinary name, an ordinary face, ordinary talent. Harry was no Snape, who had mastered parts of the dark arts before even entering Hogwarts, nor a Barty Crouch Jr., who excelled at everything, and certainly not Voldemort himself. Aside from a streak of reckless bravery, Harry had nothing remarkable. That prophecy had been nonsense. How could such a person be his destined enemy? A joke. Voldemort felt suddenly foolish for having made such a fuss over a vague prediction. Yet the outcome was undeniable. He had been defeated, though not by Harry himself, but by Lily Potter's ancient magic. Was it accident or fate? He did not know. Looking at Harry now, he only saw insignificance. Even Parseltongue, the supposedly rare gift, came from the fragment of his own soul. Harry did not merit the role of his fated enemy. Only 2 people in this world could truly be his enemies, Voldemort decided, Albus Dumbledore and one other, himself. Still, he admitted Harry's courage was dazzling. Not mere recklessness, the boy knew his own limits, and yet refused to submit. Even pinned to the ground, Harry stared up with those stubborn green eyes. Voldemort did not bother with the fury of an ant. He strolled closer. Surprisingly, he felt no anger toward the child who'd undone him. Instead, he spoke, almost fondly, of his family history. "Do you see that corpse beside you?" he said calmly, indicating the body near Harry. "That was my father." His tone held no malice. Barty Crouch Jr. even smiled, absurdly pleased. "A muggle, a fool, like your mother. But they both served their purpose. When you were small, your mother died to protect you. I killed my father, and look how useful he became after his death." The words stabbed at something in Harry. "Shut up!" he roared, hatred filling him. He wished he could tear the Dark Lord apart, but even rabid fury could not dent a Serpent King. Voldemort flicked his wand contemptuously. A jolt of cruciatus struck Harry, a measured punishment. Now that Voldemort no longer bowed to the prophecy, tormenting the boy had lost some of its taste. "Be polite, Harry," Voldemort said, indifferent. "I didn't make you into him. You should be grateful for my mercy. Otherwise, you'd be rotting or chewed by a rune spore." He spread his hand palm down. The three-headed rune spore straightened, the bony spikes of its heads resting against his palm. It was a threat more than a promise. He couldn't kill Harry here. Not yet. "It pains me," he went on, "to have killed my father with my own hands." He gave a small theatrical sigh without real sorrow. "But look, Harry, my true family is returning." Cloaks rustled. From between graves behind cedars, from every shadowed corner, figures appeared. Hooded, masked wizards apparated and gathered slowly, cautiously, as if the scene before them were unreal. Voldemort stood and waited. One by one, they knelt before him. One crawled and kissed the hem of his robe. Harry noticed a woman in black with wide, bright eyes, Bellatrix Lestrange. But now she looked confused, even a little suspicious. She raised her wand toward Voldemort. "Who are you?" she demanded. She was genuinely bewildered. The reborn Dark Lord looked almost inhuman. This was he. 12 years earlier, the Dark Lord had at least had a nose. And Bellatrix had seen Tom Riddle's portrait in the Daily Prophet. Not an elder snake at all, but a handsome, young wizard. He had returned to youth once before. Surely that had proven something. "It grieves me, Bellatrix, that you don't remember me," Voldemort replied, turning to regard the gathered Death Eaters with cold displeasure. "Who else could have summoned you but me?" A faint rustle passed through the crowd, like a collective shiver. "Why are you hesitating? Why aren't you on your knees begging forgiveness?" Barty pushed forward, angry and ready to defend Voldemort from Bellatrix's raised wand. Voldemort placed a hand on Barty's shoulder, bony fingers distinct at every joint. "Stand back, Barty," he said quietly. Voldemort valued Barty, his faithful servant, and was generous with him. As for those who had once swore loyalty but drifted away, Voldemort felt nothing but contempt. He stepped forward into the circle of hooded faces. "Welcome, Death Eaters," he said, calm. 12 years. It has been 12 years since our last gathering. You still answer my summons as if it were yesterday. We are still bound by the Dark Mark, are we not?" "Of course, my master." The ones who had escaped Azkaban called out first, but Voldemort's nostrils flared with cold mist. He sniffed. "There's a stench of guilt on you." The circle trembled. None would step forward. "Some of you are unscathed, your power intact. Why didn't you come to aid the master you swore to serve?" he asked. "We were helpless at the time, master," Rodolphus pleaded. "I know," Voldemort said softly. Those who had escaped Azkaban silently clustered behind him, understanding his election. He turned to the rest. "But you likely thought I was finished, believed I was gone. You slipped back among my enemies, pretending innocence, claiming ignorance or enchantment." Those accused trembled. "Did you really think I could not rise? Did you forget I prepared against death long ago? Did you not see my demonstrations of power when I was at my strongest?" No one answered. Voldemort moved through them barefoot like a snake, hissing in every glance. He singled out Lucius Malfoy, a pale, composed figure, and continued, forcing the matter. "Perhaps some of you found a greater master. Serving Albus Dumbledore?" He paused, then spat another name. "Or that imposter, Cyrus?" Lucius's breathing thickened. He stammered. His courage was brittle compared to Snape's. "Master, he began, teeth chattering. Voldemort cut him off. "I hear you kept up old habits while wearing a righteous mask. You still lead Muggle hunts, do you not?" "Yes, my master," Lucius squeaked. "But why didn't you seek out the true master yourself instead of serving that imposter?" Cold sweat broke out on Lucius's face, yet he had rehearsed answers. "I didn't know, master. I thought it was you." "Well, it was easy to be deceived. To everyone's surprise, Voldemort nodded. He wears my face, shares my talents, knows much about me, yet didn't I tell you to keep watch? Forgive me, Master. Lucius dropped to his knees, forehead to the earth. Get up, Lucius, Voldemort said softly. Stand. You ask for forgiveness? Very well. This is not wholly your fault. Anyone could be fooled. Barty tells me the Azkaban breakout was executed well. You didn't betray anyone. You brought some of our friends back. I hope you will serve me even more loyally from now on. Of course, Master. Thank you. Lucius sobbed with relief, but Voldemort's voice sharpened like a blade. Still, I will not forget 12 years of betrayal. I demand repayment, 12 years owed to be paid. Only then will I forgive. His gaze burned at them. Harry watched as Voldemort rained punishment on the traitors with a ferocity surpassing what he'd shown Harry. He spoke the names of spells loudly. Crucio! All those he branded traitors, save for Lucius, collapsed, writhing as if at death's door. Voldemort had restrained himself. Even the Cruciatus might have killed if cast fully. After a long moment, his anger cooled, and he straightened, almost arrogantly addressing the group. And now, about that false one, he said softly. How surprising, Lucius. Lucius bowed his head. That diary you handed to me, it recorded pieces of my past and, through complex magic, gained consciousness, Voldemort continued, hinting at the truth without naming Horcruxes. A memory of me, carrying a shard of my power, managed to take form, impersonate me, act on my behalf, and even dared to try to replace me? He laughed with scorn. I will admit that in our first 2 encounters I was too weak to best him. Wormtail was slain. The mention of Wormtail's death made faces shift among the Death Eaters. How could he have fought you? Barty cried. I was weak then, Voldemort said, but no longer. I have returned. A false impostor will soon be slain by my hand. Before he could finish, blue sparks flared at the circle's center. The sparks blossomed into a bright, high-toned music, and blue flames, like bellflowers in fire, erupted, filling the space. The shockwave threw the Death Eaters to the ground. They tumbled like plants in a gale. Voldemort alone stood his ground. A playful voice drifted from the flames. A blond youth in a trench coat stepped through the blue blaze. The sight of him sent hearts hammering across the ranks. Is that how you tell them, Lord Voldemort? The newcomer called. Every Death Eater who had known the Dark Lord's earlier face stared, torn between the 2 men. Bellatrix's eyes widened as she flicked her attention from one to the other. The newcomer lifted his chin, golden eyes sweeping over them. It's time to choose who you pledge your allegiance to, Death Eaters. Go through the flames and bow to your true master. Cyrus's golden pupils flashed like lightning. Blue fire sprang up around him, the flames parting on either side as if kneeling before a king. Bella's eyes shone as she stared at the handsome figure. For a moment, she forgot the pain in her arm. The Death Eaters all recoiled, looking up at him like ants confronting something divine. This was their lord, the one the mark called to, the one they had sworn to follow. Yet doubt flickered in many of their eyes. How could there be 2 Dark Lords? Voldemort's earlier taunt that Cyrus was a fake echoed in their minds, but the man before them was so magnificent that the newly resurrected Tom Riddle looked shabby by comparison, like a tattered counterfeit. Though I suspected you, I did not expect you would truly come before me, Voldemort said, his voice lazy. He looked a little disordered now, but his power was intact. In the earlier explosion of fire, he had been untouched. He showed no real surprise at Cyrus's presence, as if he had long expected it. Especially alone. The Black Mark could summon Death Eaters. The spell had been created by their side long ago. Voldemort had assumed Cyrus would seek Dumbledore first. Dumbledore, however, had been trapped at the Ministry by a small trick. If Cyrus had gone there, things would have become far more complicated, and Voldemort would have been gone with Harry. As it was, this was the moment Voldemort had been waiting for. He stared at Cyrus with cold appetite. Killing him outright would be satisfying. No, not just killing. He wanted to swallow him whole, to consume him and take back what belonged to him. What is there for me to fear? Do you think I would fear you, a loser? Cyrus scoffed. His words rippled through the assembled Death Eaters like a stone through a pond. The Dark Lord had been defeated? Not only by the boy who lived, but by this man, this so-called fake, who stood before them now. Those Death Eaters who had been wavering grew even more uncertain. Many had followed Voldemort for advantage. Their loyalty had been sustained by his power and cruelty. To be treated like dogs had been tolerable when they believed his victories ensured their future. But if that power could be challenged, if the snake could be bitten, why risk everything on him? Their eyes danced between Cyrus and Voldemort, torn between the terror Voldemort inspired and the dazzling presence of the young man. Cyrus strode through the flames with an arrogance that seemed almost serene, more regal than Voldemort's serpentine posture. He reached Harry's side. The flames hissed and reduced the remains of old Tom Riddle to black-gray dust that drifted into the night. The ropes that bound Harry burned away, and the fire's heat closed his wounds. "Sorry, I got caught again," Harry mumbled, embarrassed. Twice kidnapped, and both times within the supposedly safest place in Britain. He could not imagine surviving 2 days outside Hogwarts. Even Sirius and Dumbledore didn't notice Barty's disguise. Cyrus said gently, "It's not your fault, Harry." His eyes swept the Death Eaters, burning but warm, and even the hostile among them seemed cowed by the fierceness in his stare. Voldemort, however, showed no annoyance. Reborn, he brimmed with confidence. "I do not deny my past failures," he said. "I failed to kill you once, but your triumph over me when I was weak is nothing to boast of." A dangerous aura, like the smell of coagulating blood, oozed from his vertically slit pupils. He had never believed Cyrus's soul was anything other than Riddle's diary ghost. "You have not seen my true strength. I can forgive your youth, but I will not tolerate your insolence." From the start, he had intended to slay Cyrus before his followers. Only by killing him with his own hand could he prove that his old defeats were meaningless, prove he remained the invincible Dark Lord. "Watch, my friends. I will purge the misconceptions in your minds," he promised. "I will kill him here and now, and then you will know who is stronger." The killing intent poured from him like a column of blood. Both men moved at once. Cyrus stepped forward, flat-faced, placing his left hand to shield Harry while his right flicked his wand. Waves of blue fire surged toward Voldemort in a blooming ocean of flame. Voldemort barely raised his wand and shattered the inferno like foam. He pushed forward, bearing the pressure back onto Cyrus. Even with ancient magic strengthening Cyrus, he found himself driven back. The power Voldemort now wielded was incomprehensible. Only Dumbledore, with the Elder Wand, might have stood on equal footing. Voldemort shattered the flames, strode into the clearing, then raised his wrist and unleashed a black curse that depressed the ranks of the Death Eaters. Barty crouched, struggling to rise, the wind and heat bleeding the strength from his spine. The gulf between them was obvious. Barty, talented though he was, had no right to intervene. Sectum Sempra. Cyrus cut through the incoming spell with a razor of magic. The severed curse whirled past, lifting his golden hair. Spells met in the night like signal fires in fog. Voldemort toyed with dark arts Cyrus had never seen. Cyrus could not meet them head-on, and instead answered with ancient magic, thunderous and powerful. "Is that all?" Voldemort taunted, chin lifted. He had cause to sneer. His magic drove the force of Cyrus's spells backward, making the younger man's wrist ache. The attacks sharpened. As the man once called Dark Lord, Voldemort had a terrifying reputation for a reason. Even in talent, he might rival Dumbledore. Cyrus felt the strain and knew he was being pushed toward his trump card. A spell split the earth. Taking advantage of a narrow opening, Voldemort glowed green with glee. "Avada Kedavra!" The green bolt dove for Cyrus's chest like a thunder spear. Death flashed in Cyrus's golden eyes. His wand spun, and blue flames answered. "Fire Shield Charm!" 3 dark curses collided with his flame shield, detonating in a blast that sent a cloud of dust and debris 10 meters high. Gravel bit into Harry's cheek and shattered his glasses. The explosion hurled him across the ground, and he rolled several times before he stopped. Voldemort glanced at him and, with a subtle movement, wove a small, unseen protection over Harry. No one noticed, but the spell stood. The Avada Kedavra threaded through the superheated dust like a hunting snake, its green path cutting a bright arc through the gray. For one breathless second, everything fell silent. No one was visible in the dust. Only the green streak of the curse remained, clear as a wound in the air. "Mr. Cyrus?" Harry gasped. Death seemed to hang in that suspended moment, stark and complete, until Voldemort's thin laugh broke it. "Cyrus is dead, heh!" His pleasure evaporated almost instantly. The dust shifted, and something within it roared to life, whipping up a windstorm. A clear, piercing cry split the night. From the gray cloud rose a giant shadow, like a phoenix reborn, only this bird was wreathed in golden lightning. The thunderous flap of enormous wings blotting out the moonlight announced the creature's return. The thunderbird struck. Lightning, thick as a tree trunk, slammed into Voldemort's chest. He flew backward like a rag doll, rolled and skidded, and lay still. The Death Eaters reduced to ragged breaths and the distant rumble of thunder. Cyrus beat his wings once, gliding down. In a blur, the golden wings folded, sliding into the flowing tails of a black trench coat, his body reshaping, becoming human once more. The onlookers stared with a mix of astonishment, fear, and a kind of horrified fascination. He turned into a thunderbird? Barty's voice was almost a shout of disbelief. Everyone knew wizards could not properly transform into magical beasts. Those who tried became mindless five-legged monstrosities. And yet Cyrus had done it. He had become something utterly beyond the rules. Barty still clung to the idea that Cyrus was a fake, but the others' wavering loyalty now had cause to shift. Those who had once been fence-sitters watched with trembling curiosity. Perhaps Voldemort's resurrection was only his version of events. Perhaps Cyrus might be the true Dark Lord. Cyrus's eyes seemed to pierce through them all. He stepped forward and drew a ring of blue flames around himself, a barrier that hummed with power. "Now," he said coldly, "make your choice. Bow to your true master." The command was both coercive and magnanimous. Harry, standing amid the fire, looked at him with a voice caught behind his teeth. For a moment he had thought Cyrus dead. In an instant, Cyrus had felled Voldemort. Now he seemed to be recruiting the same villains again, as if ready to inherit Voldemort's army. Harry found the idea repellent, but his tongue would not form a question. Cyrus's voice dropped into a lazy, almost seductive cadence. "Pass through the flames and walk with me. 180, Death Eaters and the Order of the Phoenix. Pass through the flames and walk with me." Cyrus extended the invitation. Under the dark sky, eerie blue flames washed the Death Eaters' pale faces in ghostly light. They looked astonished, angry, or tempted. Several had already hauled themselves up out of the mud and were taking stiff steps toward Cyrus. But having seen the flames' terror, none dared touch them. They feared they would be burned to ash the moment they did. "Stop!" Barty roared in fury. "Are you trying to betray us?" The Death Eaters froze, but only for a few seconds before someone stepped forward to answer Barty. "We are loyal to the Dark Lord. Now that we return to his side, how is this betrayal?" It was Osidor not speaking. For him, the identity of the true Lord Voldemort mattered little. This was no longer about ideals, but survival. Still, he didn't want to be the first to act. Cyrus watched from behind the flames, silent. Given their ostensible loyalty, few of them truly had the strength to walk through his blue fire and stand at his side. But Cyrus did not aim to annihilate them. He had lowered his standards. Anyone who surrendered now would not be reduced to ash by the shield, but their souls would feel the consuming pain of fire. Barty glared at the turncoats, wand raised, seemingly ready to fire a killing curse at the first who showed any sign of defection, to punish disloyalty with death. No one expected the first to step into the fire to be Bellatrix Lestrange. Bellatrix, wild, adoring, previously the most loyal in Barty's eyes, shot forward like a black snake and plunged into the flames in the blink of an eye. She laughed, and the fire did not harm her. Instead, it wrapped her warmly, as if protective. "Bellatrix?" Barty could not hide his shock. Bellatrix moved within the flames, arms spread as though embracing them. Her expression was rapt and crazed. When she looked at Barty, there was a possessive certainty in her eyes. "Of course I'm returning to my master's side," she whispered, voice soft as if speaking to a lover. Then, for all to see, she bowed slightly to Cyrus, sank to her knees, and kissed the back of his shoe. "Rise, Bellatrix. Only servants kneel before me. Stand behind me and follow my steps," Cyrus said, extending his hand but not dropping to his knees. Bellatrix looked up with fanatic adoration. She took his hand, rose, and turned once like a black swan, then stood behind him, her gaze never leaving him. With Bellatrix as the first to join him, those previously frozen by fear became tempted. Not became the second to step into the flames. Barty, recovering from the shock of Bellatrix's betrayal, was furious. He leveled his wand at Nott's back without hesitation. Avada Kedavra! A green jet of light screamed toward Nott, but Cyrus lifted his wand as if conducting an orchestra. The flames spiked up and completely engulfed Nott. Boom! The blue fire intercepted Barty's curse. The rolling heat knocked Barty backward, singing his skin. "How dare you lay a hand on my servant?" Cyrus said coldly. To Cyrus, they were servants. Unlike Bellatrix, Nott felt the flames tear at his soul the moment he touched them. He stumbled as if into a living conflagration, skin burning. He only managed a few steps before his face twisted in pain. His pale nails dug into his chest, and he fell to his knees amid the fire. "Master," Nott croaked, stretching a shaking hand toward Cyrus with a pleading look. Cyrus was indifferent. "This is punishment, Nott," he said. "Crawl over." Bellatrix curled her lip, watching Osidor prostrate before Cyrus with disgust and contempt. Nott could only move like a beaten dog. Every inch he advanced felt as if he trod on hot iron. Each agonized shriek evaporated the tears on his cheeks. He wanted to turn back, but turning back now was a promise of death. Seeing Nott's misery stiffened the resolve of those remaining outside the circle. The sight hardened many of them into action. Didn't this coldness, this ruthless command, mirror Lord Voldemort? This had to be the Dark Lord. About half of them, terrified, shuffled into the flames like prisoners forced to cross a mountain of knives barefoot. Once through, they knelt. Soon another who could pass the flames with ease appeared. Bulstrode, an elderly wizard who had been close to Voldemort in his youth. He strode through the fire and quickly overtook Nott. "Stand behind me, Bulstrode," Cyrus said with a faint smile. As one of Voldemort's earliest followers, the old wizard was familiar from Voldemort's memories. He had once been full of awe and an idealism intertwined with pureblood arrogance. There were still many Death Eaters left. Many just returned from Azkaban and unwilling to believe Voldemort had fallen so easily. Those who stepped into the fire crawled on their knees to Cyrus, kissing his shoes and robes. They clustered around him like ants, elevating him as if he could touch the sky. "My master, I beg forgiveness and swear eternal loyalty." Nott whimpered, voice trembling. One by one, the rest pleaded the same, and the blue flames wound around their left arms like serpents. Where the fire passed, thick black mist billowed from their limbs. They clutched the pain as the black mark burned and emitted foul-smelling smoke. The fire snakes left behind reddish, spiral burns, the mark of ancient magic. Cyrus planned to forge his own wizard army. These pure-blood families were a motley collection, but they still held enormous sway in Britain's magical world. Some lineages even stretched to other continents. He had not chosen a name yet. His organization was still in its nascent form. But the seeds were sown. One day, they would grow into towering trees with dense branches and tangled roots, forming an expansive network. Whether wizard or muggle, the world would be remade as one. Once the mark was carved, the fire's pain eased slightly. The Death Eaters bowed in grateful worship. Cyrus took a small pleasure in this, though he could not help but notice how pitiful they looked, and he knew the real Lord Voldemort was not truly dead. Voldemort could not have been killed by a single blow. He had long modified his body with magic and built protections stronger than a dragon. Cyrus could tell by looking that this was a ruse, a feint. Still, as most of the Death Eaters had already bent the knee, the gray form that had seemed corpse-like stirred. "How can I describe my disappointment in you?" Lord Voldemort's voice, soft and precise, carried to everyone. "As for you, Lucius, I thought you would turn to that impostor's embrace immediately." Lucius dropped his head and swore, "I swear my loyalty to you, my master." He attempted to step toward Voldemort, but Cyrus blocked him. Lucius was a useful pawn if kept by Voldemort, even if he was not particularly capable. "Bellatrix," Voldemort said, voice sharp with betrayal, "I thought your loyalty surpassed all others." "I am loyal to the Dark Lord," Bellatrix declared, casually tapping her cheek with her wand as she looked at Voldemort. The Death Eaters, who had already sworn fealty, now felt fear prick at their hearts and glanced at Voldemort, suddenly unsure if they had chosen the right side. Their faltering thoughts translated into immediate pain. The new marks on their arms burned hot and wreathed like venomous snakes beneath the skin. They shrieked and collapsed. Wherever the snakes crept, the flesh scorched and ugly scars were left behind. "This is the price of betrayal," Cyrus said, looking down on them with contempt. He stepped out of the flames to face Lord Voldemort directly. He had no illusions. Voldemort was not so easily toppled. If he had been, Dumbledore would seem ridiculous for years of struggle. "I must say, you continue to surprise me, Cyrus," Voldemort said, aloud and almost admiringly. "Is this the power of ancient magic?" Cyrus had indeed grown beyond his former self. He had accomplished things even Voldemort had not, even manipulating magical creatures through transfiguration. But despite his restored strength, Cyrus felt it still was not enough. He watched the Death Eaters writhing and felt only disgust for them. "I truly can't find words for your stupidity," Voldemort sneered. "Did you not think I was defeated once already?" Yet as he looked over the Death Eaters drawn to Cyrus, no regret softened his face. He had never truly valued purebloods. They were merely useful servants whose veins contained no Muggle blood. Of all betrayals, Bellatrix's wounded him the most. She had been someone he might have entrusted with a Horcrux, and now she stood behind Cyrus. Though her husband stood beside Voldemort now, that did little to ease the sting. But Voldemort was not sentimental. "The game ends now, Cyrus. I will show you my true power, not only mine, but my family's," Voldemort said, meaning his Death Eaters. The traitors who had bent the knee were humiliated enough. The rest would be dealt with ruthlessly. "You kill those traitors," Voldemort ordered, his serpent eyes sweeping those who still remained loyal. When his gaze landed on Rodolphus, he added more cruelly, "You go kill Bellatrix." "Of course, my master." Rodolphus and his brother strode forward together. Lucius drew his wand too, though his furtive look betrayed an instinct for self-preservation. "Barty, are you all right?" Voldemort asked his most faithful servant with an almost tender note. Barty answered by falling in beside him. "Bulstrode is yours to kill," Voldemort said, nodding to Barty. "You know he was one of my earliest followers. He deserves to be killed by your hand." "Of course." Barty was eager. Voldemort's side felt consolidated and menacing. Cyrus's followers, though similar in number now, only truly had 2.5 competent fighters, Bellatrix, Bulstrode, and Harry, who had picked up others' wands and was not a fully trained wizard. "You are isolated, Cyrus," Voldemort hissed. "Is that so?" Cyrus smiled, tilted his chin, and lifted his gaze to the night sky. Under the stars, ghostly riders appeared, mounted on skeletal, black-winged beasts, the steeds of death. The silhouettes were unmistakable. The Order of the Phoenix had arrived.